Chapter 789. In every dominion on Elysium, one must be humble towards the overgod they worshipped. Han Shua's behavior could be considered as blasphemy against the overgod. This crime could be serious or minor. If pursued, it could even affect Han Shua's future in the City of Shadows. Therefore, when Han Shua saw the trace of a sneer on Ralph's face, he had a bad feeling. Sure enough, Ralph waited for Wallace to finish the ceremony. When everyone stood up and raised their heads, Ralph immediately shouted, "Lord Brian, you were disloyal to the Overlord just now. How dare you not kneel on one knee? As a believer of the Overlord, your blasphemy is unforgivable." Wallace, who was about to announce something, was rather surprised to hear Ralph's words. He turned to look at Han Shua, bunched his brows, and asked, "Brian, is what Ralph said true? I didn't expect Lord Ralph to be so narrow-minded. We only had some disagreements 2 days ago, but Lord Ralph is maliciously slandering me. I'm really surprised." Of course, Han Shua wouldn't admit to it. Once the label of blasphemy was pinned on him, he'd really be in quite a bit of trouble if it was used as a pretext. "Lord Brian, you are quite good at lying through your teeth. If you dare to do it, why wouldn't you dare to admit it?" Ralph shouted coldly. His sharp eyes stared straight at Han Shua as though he was trying to overwhelm Han Shua with his imposing manner and make Han Shua feel guilty. Wallace, Andre, and the others beside him had sharp gazes. They would be able to detect the slightest change in Han Shua's mood. Unfortunately, Han Shua's willpower was not something Ralph could imagine. Under Ralph's eagle-like gaze, not only did Han Shua not reveal the slightest hint of guilt, he even pretended to be innocent. He glared at Ralph furiously and said, "Lord Ralph, you know who is lying and who is slandering himself. Don't you have that much tolerance? You're lying through your teeth." Ralph didn't expect Han Shua to be so difficult to deal with. Han Shua let out a sigh, shook his head, and said helplessly, "I have always thought that Lord Ralph was an upright man. Little did I expect that you would make such baseless slander just because of a verbal dispute. How disappointing." Ralph, is there a need for you to make such a big fuss over such a small matter?" Erebus raised his voice and said maliciously. When he noticed that everyone's attention was focused on him, he explained, "A few days ago, Brian and Ralph got into an argument at Lady Aobashi's place. I don't think Brian is the kind of person who would lie." Casper, the patriarch of the Kinson family, suddenly said softly. The patriarchs of the other 2 major family clans nodded in agreement. They all said that Han Shua did not look like the kind of person who would lie. What they implied was that Ralph was deliberately slandering Han Shua. Ralph had always been unpopular in the City of Shadows. The patriarchs of the 3 major family clans were rather dissatisfied with Ralph. Therefore, they immediately seized the opportunity to express their trust in Han Shua without saying anything about Ralph. Wallace bunched his brows and looked at Ralph before turning to Han Shua. After a moment of silence, he said, "Ralph might have seen wrongly. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. It's just a small misunderstanding." Ralph shut his mouth after hearing Wallace's words. He knew that Wallace's words were to protect him, and he did not insist that Han Shua had blasphemed the gods. Han Shua still put on an innocent face and looked at Ralph with eyes filled with hatred and resentment. Those who didn't know might have thought that Han Shua felt sorry for Ralph's character. However, Han Shua was sneering in his heart. From the attitude of the 3 major family clans, Han Shua knew that Ralph was indeed unpopular. The fact that the other members of the House of Saint did not say a word to help Ralph proved that Carmelita was right. Even the members of the House of Saint did not like Wallace, their most loyal lackey. Han Shua secretly heaved a sigh of relief at the fact that Ralph was so unpopular. He knew that if he were to really clash with Ralph, he would be the first to gain the upper hand. After the commotion died down, Wallace finished the rest of his speech and started to explain the rules of the duel. Except for Han Shua, the newcomer, everyone else knew the rules of the tournament like the back of their hands. Wallace's main audience was Han Shua. However, Han Shua had also learned the rules from Erebus and Aobashi. When Wallace saw Han Shua nodding indifferently to indicate that he understood the rules, he hastened his speech and finished what he needed to say. In the tournament between the 7 corps, Each party is allowed to form a company. The number of divine guards must not exceed 100, and there must not be any high gods among the divine guards. In the tournament between the 7 corps, accidental injuries and deaths could be forgiven. However, intentional murder was strictly prohibited. Even if a team was accidentally killed or injured, the number of divine guards must not exceed 5. The tournament at the beginning was always a team fight with different rules every time. Sometimes, the team would choose a target and the 7 companies would march towards the target together. Fighting was not prohibited along the way. The first team to reach the target would be the winner. Sometimes, the tournament would involve hunting powerful magical beasts in a mountain range. Under such circumstances, the tournament would be held in a mountain range where a large number of magical beasts roamed freely. The team with the most magical beast cores would be the winner. The tournament this time was a little special. Wallace had hidden many divine essences emitting unique energy fluctuations in the easternmost region of soaring Cloud Mountain Range. Those divine essences were located in very well-hidden locations. Wallace gave each team 7 days to search for the divine essences or plunder the divine essences obtained by others. Those divine essences emitted very special energy fluctuations. They were marked by Wallace and Andre. Once the divine essences were found, they would become an obvious target. During the 7 days, the teams could plunder or search for divine essences. No matter what method they used, the team with the most divine essences after the 7 days would be the final winner. There was also a strict rule. The 7 corps were not allowed to cooperate with each other. Once 2 teams started fighting, the other teams were not allowed to participate in the tournament. This rule was actually added specifically for Erebus and Aobashi. Wallace and Andre knew that Erebus was deeply in love with Aobashi. If the 1st and 3rd corps were to join forces, the final winner of the tournament would be their side. To prevent that from happening, there was a strict rule that forbade 2 teams from joining forces. After Wallace finished explaining the rules, the 7 company captains who would participate in the tournament were appointed by the 7 Divine Guard chiefs. Under Wallace's instructions, the teams of Divine Guards marched towards the easternmost region of soaring Cloud Mountain Range. Before Kiffin left, Ralph whispered a few words into Kiffin's ear. Kisa nodded repeatedly, and before leaving with his Divine Guards, he cast a cold glance at Barnard, who stood in the distance. The 2nd Corps Divine Guards wore wooden faces, but they were radiating intense killing intent. Their gazes when they looked at each other were extremely ferocious, as though they were bloodthirsty demonic beasts surveying their prey. Compared to the other pairs of Divine Guards, the 2nd Corps Divine Guards had clearly killed more people. Their demeanor was not something that ordinary Divine Guards could compare to. The Divine Guards from Han Shua's 5th Corps were unbelievably relaxed before joining the tournament. The 5th Corps Divine Guards, led by Gilbert and Sanguiner, were laughing and joking all the way. They did not show the slightest bit of nervousness before the big battle. Those who did not know better might have thought that they were just having fun. Compared to the 2nd Corps Divine Guards, the 5th Corps Divine Guards were just too different. Wallace, Andre, the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans, and the 6 Divine Guard chiefs, with the exception of Han Shua, were wearing strange expressions. They did not expect that the 5th Corps Divine Guards, who had always been so quiet and stern, would become so relaxed when it came to the real battle. Han Shua was the only one who smiled in satisfaction. After the others arrived at soaring Cloud Mountain Range, Han Shua had allowed his Divine Guards to rest and relax. He even allowed them to drink and have fun so that they would not be affected by the pressure of the upcoming battle. Han Shua wasn't the slightest bit worried about the abilities of these Divine Guards who came out of the 8 Desolation and Torment formation. The only thing he was worried about was that they would put too much pressure on him. Now that he saw them walking towards the easternmost region, laughing and chatting happily, Han Shua was completely at ease. The 7 teams of nearly 700 Divine Guards split into 7 teams and departed according to Wallace's instructions. The easternmost region of soaring Cloud Mountain Range was a day's journey away. After the Divine Guards left, Wallace and Andre got busy setting up the sand table on the central grandstand. Wallace had a spatial divine device in his hand. Strands of divine energy were constantly flowing out from the divine device and landing on the easternmost region of the sand table. The divine energy was intertwined with the energy towers that had been set up earlier. After a while, Wallace suddenly inserted the spatial divine device into the center of the sand table. A wave of intense spatial distortion undulated from the surface of the sand table. A glass-like spatial boundary took shape on the surface of the sand table. Under Han Shua's attentive gaze, the scene depicted on the sand table suddenly changed. All the inanimate objects suddenly became vivid and lifelike. After a short while, another wave of spatial distortion took shape on the sand table. When the spatial distortion subsided and Han Shua looked at the sand table again, he discovered that the easternmost region of the sand table seemed to have been magnified infinitely. Everything within the region was reflected. Not far away, many tiny people the size of ants were moving towards the center of the sand table. This spatial divine device has formed a miraculous connection with the energy towers in that region. From here, we can see everything that is happening in that region. With us here, I believe that nothing will go wrong in that region. Everyone will also be able to clearly see which side has the strongest divine guards. Wallace appeared rather pleased with himself when he saw that the sand table was in place. He raised his head and swept his gaze across the crowd before explaining smilingly. The crowd, of course, praised the power of the divine device and flattered Wallace in a roundabout way. Only Han Shua had a bitter smile on his face. Han Shua did not know that Wallace had this trick up his sleeves. Therefore, he had given Barnard and the others some secret orders. If Barnard had followed Han Shua's orders, and the situation had fallen into the eyes of Wallace and the others, it would not have been good for Han Shua. Chapter 790. In the past few tournaments, there had never been a full-scale surveillance like this one. It appeared that Wallace had just obtained that Space Divine tool not too long ago. The sand table was displaying the actual scene of the arena. However, the figures were shrunk by a few hundred times. This was just enough for Han Shua and the others to see everything clearly. Gradually, the 7 teams entered the battle area from 7 different directions. As soon as they entered the battle area, the 7 teams immediately spread out, like 7 thin black lines swimming in 7 different directions. The patriarchs of the 4 major family clans, the 7 Divine Guard chiefs, and some other distinguished personages of the City of Shadows were attentively watching the sand table. Ralph, the chief of Second Corps, was slightly bunching his brows. Just like Han Shua, he had given Kiffin a special order. Ralph did not anticipate that Wallace would do this. If Kiffin were to deliberately kill a 5th Corps Divine Guard during the match, Wallace and the others would definitely notice. Ralph felt rather uneasy when he thought of this. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at Han Shua. It was at this moment that Han Shua, who was just as guilty as Ralph, happened to glance at Ralph. When their gazes met, Ralph's face turned cold and he let out a soft groan. Han Shua, on the other hand, put on a faint smile and wore a calm and composed face. Those divine essences emit unique energy undulations. The places where they are hidden are marked with inconspicuous markings. Once the divine essence is taken out of the hiding place, the energy undulations will spread outwards. Those in the vicinity will be able to sense it very clearly, explained Wallace when he saw that the crowd remained silent. We have just entered that area and no one has discovered a piece of divine essence yet. This is going to be interesting. We will get to see who is the strongest, said Rugersi, the chief of the 6th Corps, smilingly. As soon as Wallace spoke, everyone immediately agreed with him and expressed their own opinions. Time passed by quickly. It had already been half a day since the 7 brigades had entered that region. In the dense forest and the irregular, jagged rocks, the 7 brigades gradually grew further and further apart from each other. They carefully sensed the changes in their surroundings and searched for any divine crystals that might exist nearby. The 5th Corps, nominally led by Barnard, advanced unhurriedly in a certain direction. Along the way, Bollins divided the army into 9 squads. Sanguiner and Gilbert each led a squad. The 9 squads maintained a formation and distance from each other as they carefully moved through the forest of strange rocks and dense forests. Bollins, Sir, wants us to seize the 2nd Corps and ignore the 1st and 3rd Corps. But this region is very wide, and we have spread out from the other brigades. What if we can't find the 2nd Corps? asked Barnard to Bollins. Although Barnard was the leader of the squad in name, in reality, it was Bollins who gave the orders. Having sharpened his skills in the Third Corps for many years, Bollins was very familiar with the workings of Divine Guards. On top of that, he possessed extraordinary strength and was able to act calmly. Therefore, even if Han Shuo did not give him any instructions, he would still know what to do. "Don't worry, I know where those from the Second Corps are," said Bollins. He had left a mark on a member of the Second Corps. "Those fellas are very arrogant. Damn it, they looked at us with unfriendly gazes when they came. Hee, this time, we will show them who is the strongest in the City of Shadows," said Gilbert viciously. "The Second Corps has always been the strongest in the City of Shadows. I believe that they will be the first to seize the divine essences found by others. Why don't we conserve our strength and wait for the Second Corps to finish plundering the divine essences of the other teams? Then, we'll go and plunder the divine essences of the Second Corps. What do you think?" Sanguis was a tough guy. He had the idea of starting with the Second Corps. Upon hearing his suggestion, a few others agreed with him. They all felt that Sanguiner's idea was a good one. Bollins was the only one who remained silent. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and calmly said, "This isn't a safe method. If the Second Corps doesn't have many divine essences and we haven't collected any, we might not be able to get first place even if we rob the Second Corps." After taking a short pause, Bollins continued, "To be on the safe side, let's spend some time searching for as many divine essences as we can. After we get some, we will rob the Second Corps. That way, we will be absolutely safe." The reason why Bollins was able to become the true leader of this team was that he was never impulsive. He could never maintain a clear head at any moment. He would not ruin the plan because of his recklessness. The party thought for a moment and felt that Bollins's suggestion was the safest. They continued to search every region they came from. The first to obtain a piece of divine essence was neither the Second Corps nor the Fifth Corps. It was Rugerse's Sixth Corps. It appeared that the Sixth Corps was in luck. One of the divine guards in the team was submerged in a swamp. That divine guard suddenly sensed a miraculous energy fluctuation coming from the swamp. The divine guards cheered and dived into the swamp. From the depths of the swamp, they obtained a divine essence. The swamp had been set up using a special method. When the divine essence was still in the swamp, only those who had sunk into the swamp would be able to sense the energy fluctuation. But when the divine essence flew out of the swamp and lost the concealment of the swamp, the energy fluctuation coming from the divine essence became even more obvious. Han Shuo and his party at the center of soaring Cloud Mountain Range could clearly see a red dot of light in the Sixth Corps area. Wallace pointed at the red dot of light in the Sixth Corps area and explained, "Every piece of divine essence has been specially treated. We can see the red dot from here. The divine guards who have ventured deep into the swamp can also see it from a certain distance." The main purpose of this was to have the teams fight each other. That way, they would not be able to tell which team was the strongest. Only by competing with each other could one distinguish the winner. Rugerse, the chief of Sixth Corps, was wearing a big smile as he remarked, "It seems that our Sixth Corps is in luck. This is just the beginning. Whether or not our luck is good will depend on what happens next," said Camilla, the chief of Sixth Corps. Camilla, the chief of Fourth Corps, shot a glance at Rugerse and said in an indifferent tone, "Besides, luck isn't the most important factor. The Sixth Corps was the first to obtain a divine essence. In the following day, the other teams also obtained divine essences from oddly shaped rocks, ancient tree roots, the bottom of clear rivers, and other strange and bizarre areas. The divine essences were stored in very well-hidden locations. Only divine guards who were observant and attentive would be able to find them. The Sixth Corps' luck did not last long. For a period of time, Camilla's Fourth Corps was extremely lucky. They found 7 divine essences in a row. As soon as the divine essences left their hiding places, they would radiate dazzling lights and emit extremely powerful energy fluctuations. Wallace even forbade the teams from storing the divine essences so that they could fight each other. Therefore, as long as there was a bright light, there would be divine guards around. Compared to the Fourth and Sixth Corps, the Fifth Corps led by Bollins was a little unlucky. It appeared that the area they had chosen had a limited number of divine essences. So far, they had only obtained 2 divine essences. Under Kiffin's leadership, the second corps had obtained 5 divine essences. Their results were neither good nor bad. Another half a day passed. All 7 teams had obtained some divine essences. Camilla's fourth corps' luck did not stop. She had obtained another 5 divine essences. The second corps had also obtained 2 more. Ballins's team had only obtained 1 more. They were the unluckiest team. Camilla was overjoyed to see that her fourth corps was far ahead of the others. She smilingly said to Rugersi, "See? Only by maintaining good luck can one be truly lucky." Rugersi mischievously smiled and replied, "You have just said that luck isn't the most important factor." Gradually, another period of time passed. It was as though all the divine essences that should have been found had been found. The 7 teams did not find any more divine essences. It's about time. 90% of the divine essences have been found. Andre put on a faint smile and explained to the crowd who were staring intently at the sand table, "Now, it's time for the most exciting part. Almost all the divine crystals had been found. Every team had more or less obtained some. If the team with less divine crystals wanted to win, they could only snatch them from other teams. At this time, the battle would enter a chaotic period. The true strength of each team would be revealed in the following moments. The patriarchs and divine guard chiefs of major family clans became even more focused. They knew that the most exciting part of the battle was about to begin. They immediately concentrated their attention on the sand table, wanting to see which 2 teams would be the first to fight. Generally speaking, the second corps, which had the strongest overall strength, would be the first to attack. As a matter of fact, under Kiffin's leadership, the second corps was indeed heading towards the area with the strongest energy fluctuations. That was where Camilla's fourth corps was located. The second corps was famous for their formidable combat strength. When Kiffin and his team headed towards that area, the captains of the 6th and 7th Corps pretended not to see them. It was obvious that they did not want to clash with the second corps right from the start. Kiffin's idea was somewhat similar to that of Ballin's. He wanted to first take down the team with the most divine essences and mix them with his own divine essences to ensure that he was ahead of the others. Then, he would settle the score with Han Shua's 5th Corps. Camilla's face turned ugly when she saw that the second corps was charging towards her 4th Corps. The second corps, trained by Ralph, were famous for their terrifying combat strength. Her 4th Corps had never been able to defeat the second corps in previous competitions. Now that she had finally gained the upper hand, Camilla knew that her divine guards would not be able to escape unscathed if those fiendish demons of the second corps were to charge at them. However, it was not the second corps and the 4th Corps that started the battle. Instead, it was Batuk's 7th Corps and Han Shua's 5th Corps. It appeared that the 7th Corps thought that the 5th Corps was the easiest to deal with. They coldly watched as the 2nd Corps went after the 4th Corps. After the 2nd Corps left, they immediately went for the 5th Corps. The battle had just begun. Batuk secretly glanced at Han Shua and praised his subordinate's wisdom. The 5th Corps is the weakest. Although they don't have a lot of divine essences, they will still have the upper hand if they get the divine essences first. Chapter 791. Perhaps it was because the 5th Corps Divine Guards had behaved too casually before entering the battlefield, but in the eyes of Batuk and the others, the 5th Corps Divine Guards led by Han Shua were the easiest to deal with. When Batuk's 7th Corps Company took the initiative to attack Ballins and his party, Batuk put on a cheerful face and secretly praised Han Shua's party. Not only Batuk, even Rugersi of the 6th Corps thought that Ballins and his party were too vulnerable. Rugersi couldn't help but take a glance at Batuk when he saw that Batuk's Divine Guards were the first to attack Han Shua's 5th Corps Divine Guards. His eyes were filled with frustration as though he had been robbed of the divine essences. It appeared that not only Batuk, but even Rugersi also had the idea of snatching the divine essences from Han Shua's 5th Corps. But unfortunately, Wallace had stipulated that once a battle broke out between 2 parties, the other party was not allowed to intervene or join forces. Therefore, when Batuk's party started fighting, Rugersi's Divine Guards could not participate even if they wanted to. Before the 4th Corps Divine Guards and 2nd Corps Divine Guards could gather, Batuk's 7th Corps Divine Guards, and Han Shua's 5th Corps Divine Guards had already started fighting. The crowd's attention was immediately drawn to the 7th and 5th Corps Divine Guards. Both Wallace and Andre had focused their eyes. They wanted to know the true strength of the 5th Corps. Now that they could clearly see the 5th Corps' strength through the miniaturized map on the sand table, they felt that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Unlike Batuk and Rujersi, ever since the two brothers learned that Han Shua had defeated City Lord Hafs of Hushvale City, they no longer treated Han Shua as an ordinary chief of divine guards. When Balins and his party entered the battlefield, they were laughing and chatting leisurely with a vague air of arrogance. Wallace and Andre did not believe that the 5th Corps would be the easiest to defeat. Batuk, you sure are lucky. Camilla, the chief of 4th Corps, was filled with indignation as he watched Kiffin's army aggressively approach him. When he noticed that Batuk's men had allowed Kiffin of the 2nd Corps to pass by him without engaging him in battle, he was immediately filled with indignation when he noticed that Batuk's men were picking on the 5th Corps to take advantage of them. Hee, the strategy of my subordinates is better. Batang was not humble, and his face was full of pride. After saying that, Batuk looked at Han Shua a little embarrassedly and said with a smile, Lord Brian, although I can't show mercy in the battle, I've instructed them in advance. Don't worry, they know what they're doing and won't hurt your people. By saying this, it meant that Batang had given the order beforehand. It looked like from the beginning, Batang had treated Han Shua's 5th Bureau as the weakest. However, as the House of Buller still needed to purchase his medicines from the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, Batuk did not wish to offend Han Shua too much. Therefore, he had instructed his subordinates not to make things too difficult for Han Shua. Han Shua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and pretended to be grateful. Thank you, Lord Batuk. Just as Batuk was about to say a few humble words to ease the tension between him and Han Shua, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of the battle taking place on the sand table. His expression immediately changed, and he couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Through the miniature model on the sand table, the crowd could clearly see the 5th Corps Divine Guards led by Balins. They were positioned in a cone-shaped formation like a sharp long sword, thrusting at the 7th Corps Divine Guards that were charging at them. The 3 black dots at the forefront were Balins, Gilbert, and Sanguiner. The 3 were at the forefront of the cone-shaped formation. They were like the tip of a sharp blade that pierced straight into the heart of the 7th Corps. They were charging towards the area where the divine essences shone brightly like a hot knife through butter. It was obvious that they were preparing to rob the divine essences guarded by the 7th Corps. With Balins, Sanguiner, and Sanguiner in the lead, the divine guards who had been tempered in the 8 Desolation and Torment formation suddenly radiated intense killing intent. They attacked with divine weapons and divine energies. They cooperated with each other and charged forward. Gilbert wore an enraged face. He blasted away the 7th Corps Divine Guards in front of him with his darkness divine energy. He cursed, God damn it, do you really think we are easy to bully? I have no intention of robbing your divine essences. How dare you attack us? You must be tired of living. Han Shua was infuriated. He had originally planned to deal with Gilbert and the others from the 2nd Corps and was leisurely searching for divine essences that might have been hidden. But suddenly, he noticed that Tuno, the chief of the 7th Corps, had surrounded them with a sinister smile on his face. Without saying a word, Tuno and his men charged at Han Shua and the others. From Heilong's point of view, he was already giving them face by not killing them. He did not expect that those people would not know how to appreciate his kindness and would provoke him. Heilong, don't kill them. Don't go too far, shouted Balins in a cold voice. He knew Heilong's temperament very well. Balins could tell that Tuno and his men were only after the divine essences they were guarding. Although the 7th Corps Divine Guards were asking for a beating, they did not show any intention of killing. Before entering the 7th Corps, Han Shua had instructed Balins that other than the 2nd Corps Divine Guards, the other teams were to act according to the attitude of the other teams. After observing for a while, when Balins realized that the 7th Corps' target was only the divine crystal, he immediately gestured to the others, indicating that they shouldn't be too ruthless and should just snatch the opponent's divine crystal. Gilbert could be considered to have some trust in Balins. Therefore, after hearing Balins shout, he cursed angrily for a few more times before he, Sanguiner, and Balins continued to clear a path for Tuno from the house of Buller, who was coming from another direction. Tuno, the chief of the 7th Corps, was now filled with regret. When he saw Balins and his 2 companions barging in like maniacs and blasting away the divine guards around him, Tuno realized that he had messed with an iron plate. Tuno immediately mobilized his experts to intercept Sanguis and the others. He also ordered a few squad leaders to attack from the flank. From Tuno's point of view, only Sanguis and the other 2 divine guards of the 5th Corps were powerful. The rest of the divine guards were newbies. However, he soon discovered that he was wrong. When the squad leaders reported to him in a dejected manner that the enemy's flanks were tightly guarded, Tuno knew that the situation was grave. With Sanguiner, Balins, and Gilbert leading the way, they were like a sharp blade stabbing straight into the heart of the 7th Corps. None of the divine guards, including Tuno, could come up with any effective countermeasures. They could only watch as the trio and their divine guards charged straight towards the divine essences. The battle on the sand table was in full swing. Outside the sand table, Batung's face gradually turned pale. The patriarchs of the 4 major family clans and the divine guard chiefs who were discussing the situation in low voices suddenly quieted down as though they had agreed to meet. The crowd surrounded the sand table, their eyes fixed on the 5th Corps divine guards who were charging forward as though there was no one else around them. Their faces were grave and solemn. They are not on the same level. That was the thought in everyone's mind. Han Shua's 5th Corps divine guards were like a sharp sword that could cut through anything. They rampaged through the 7th Corps divine guards without encountering any resistance. From their vantage point, they could clearly see the sharpness and strength of the 5th Corps' formation. In the face of such strength, Tuno's 7th Corps divine guards could do nothing but evade. There was no way they could retaliate. The gap was too huge. Wallace glanced at Han Shua in amazement and discovered that Han Shua had a faint, indifferent smile on his face. He didn't seem to be happy about anything, nor was he sad about himself. It was as if all the changes in the sand table couldn't affect him at all. This kind of calmness and composure, as if everything was under his control, was something that even Wallace couldn't achieve. This youngster is too unbelievable, thought Wallace. He couldn't help but recall Andre's suggestion and turned to look at Andre. The two were standing next to each other. Andre immediately sensed Wallace's gaze. He put on a bitter smile and shook his head. He softly exclaimed, "I knew that the 5th Corps wouldn't be that easy to deal with. Lord Brian, you are cheating." Batuk suddenly shouted in a low voice. The changes happening in the sand table had forced him to lose his composure. After drawing everyone's attention, Batuk pointed at Balins, Sanguiner, and Gilbert at the forefront of the cone formation and said, "They are too powerful. Even my divine guards have late-stage mid-god strengths. Yet, they couldn't stop their rampage. This is clearly not something that 3 mid-gods can do." After hearing Batuk's words, the crowd thought carefully and agreed with him. Ralph, the chief of the 2nd Corps, was just as furious. After witnessing the astonishing strength displayed by the 5th Corps, Ralph was even more furious than Batuk. Even if Batuk were to fail, it wouldn't be a big deal. But now, the 5th Corps had seriously threatened the position of the 2nd Corps in the City of Shadows. Most importantly, before Kiffin entered the arena, Ralph had given Kiffin the order to kill the 5th Corps Divine Guards. But at this rate, who knew who would be the one getting killed? That's right. The strength of those 3 is uncannily strong. I don't think that 3 mid-gods can break through the defenses of a dozen or so late-stage mid-god divine guards in such a short time. Ralph put on a gloomy face and said in a low voice. He shot a cold glance at Han Shua and said, "Lord Brian, you didn't arrange for a high god to enter the arena, did you?" Batuk and Ralph were not the only ones who had the same question. All the other divine guard chiefs were also puzzled. Upon hearing those words, everyone turned to look at Han Shua. Andre was the only one who bunched his brows. Han Shua chuckled, shook his head, and said, with the same strength, "If they know how to coordinate their attacks, they will be able to display a different amount of attack power. This is nothing to be surprised about. If those of the same strength could display the same amount of attack power, I believe that the competition between teams would be meaningless. According to what you said, shouldn't all late-stage mid-gods fight to a draw? It is true that a team can display great strength when they work together. But the attack power displayed by those three is a little too ridiculous. Batuk explained with his brows bunched. Han Shua burst into laughter and confidently said, "It's not ridiculous at all. It's just that none of you have seen it before." Chapter 792. "I don't believe it," shouted Ralph. He turned to City Lord Wallace and said, "My lord, I believe that one of the three is a high god." Wallace bunched his brows and turned to look at Han Shua. "My Han family does not have that many high gods. Before entering the arena, they have all been inspected by the House of Saint. I believe that if they possess high god strength, they shouldn't be able to enter the arena." "Lord Andre should have the right to say this," said Han Shua smilingly and nodded at Andre. "That's right. My men will be in charge of that. Any team that enters the arena will have to inject their divine energy into the crystal used to test for divine energy. The fact that those three could enter the arena means that they are definitely not high gods," said Andre confidently. As the concentration of divine energy in the body of a high god was different from that of a mid-god, the crystal used to test for divine energy could identify a high god through their divine energy. However, as Balans, Sanguiner, and the others did not cultivate in the energy of this world, they naturally could not detect anything. Gilbert, on the other hand, was still in the low god realm. Wallace no longer had any doubts after hearing Andre's assurance. He said in an indifferent tone, "Then there shouldn't be any problems. You two, don't say anything else." Ralph and Batuk stared blankly for a moment. Their faces were filled with puzzlement. Naturally, they would not believe that Andre would lie under such circumstances. It appeared that the trio really weren't high gods. However, if they weren't high gods, it would be unbelievable for them to be able to unleash such terrifying energy. After hearing Andre's assurance, the crowd once again turned their gazes to Han Shua. Their gazes were filled with astonishment and puzzlement. They could not understand why Han Shua's fifth core divine guards would be so outstanding. While the battle was still ongoing, Balans, Sanguiner, and Gilbert had broken through the layers of defenses of the seventh core and arrived at the arena filled with sparkling divine essences. To Balans and the other two, seizing the divine crystal from the hands of the seventh core was not too difficult. When they charged towards Tuno like a hot knife through butter, it almost meant that the seventh core had lost the ability to resist them. With Balans, Sanguiner, and Gilbert leading the way, the fifth core divine guards behind them formed a very tight defense. They blocked all attacks from the flanks and soon entered the central area protected by the seventh core divine guards. "Surround them," shouted Balans in a cold voice. The divine guards at the rear immediately spread out and surrounded the seventh core divine guards. "Don't kill them." Balans instructed the divine guards to attack. Soon after, he nodded at Sanguiner and Gilbert. Barnard and the other divine guards were in charge of providing cover. Their attacks rained down from the sky. Balans and the other two took the opportunity to charge into the encirclement. Balans and Sanguiner took the lead. Their killing intent was constantly overflowing from their bodies. The broadsword in Sanguiner's hand that was refined from blood crystals exploded with dazzling blood-red radiance. The blood flow of the seventh core divine guards around them was disrupted, affecting the flow of their divine energy. The broadsword had an amplifying effect on the blood god mantra. Sanguiner's skin was as red as blood, and his eyes were blood-red. As he charged forward, the divine guards around him could no longer control the blood in their bodies. They retreated one after another. Balans's flying sword glittered with cold radiance. Specks of sword radiance that resembled starlight flashed and disappeared, forcing the divine guards to retreat. As Sanguiner and Balans cultivated in special demonic arts, their bodies gave off a strange and frightening aura. In addition to the killing intent emanating from their bodies, the seventh core divine guards trembled with fear. They retreated as far as they could from the two. Sanguiner and the other two arrived before the seventh core divine guard, who was in charge of guarding the divine essences. When the sword was pointed at the guard, he very cooperatively handed the divine essences to Sanguiner and Balance. His eyes were filled with obvious reverence. The teams at Soaring Cloud Mountain Range were just sparring. As divine guards of the City of Shadows, they naturally wouldn't make a big fuss about it. When he learned that the 7th Corps had kicked an iron board and that their team had been easily dispersed, he knew that this would happen. Therefore, he did not put up any useless resistance. His goal this time was to retrieve the divine essences. After obtaining the divine essences, Sanguiner immediately nodded and cupped his hands at the divine guard in a very courteous manner. He said, "Forgive me for offending you." The divine guard was rather flattered. He hastily replied, "You're welcome, you're welcome." From his point of view, Sanguiner and the other two had gained the absolute upper hand. Under such circumstances, there was no need for the divine guard to be so courteous. Sanguiner had followed Han Shuo for a long time and had gradually learned some of Han Shuo's shrewdness. He knew when to be bossy and domineering and when to display his poise. At the moment of victory, his demeanor, which was neither arrogant nor rash, was somewhat reminiscent of Han Shuo. "I hope you can defeat those from the 2nd Corps," the divine guard suddenly said when he saw that Sanguiner was about to leave after obtaining the divine essences. "Don't worry, we will definitely defeat the 2nd Corps." Gilbert laughed, his face full of savagery. "Cut the crap. Let's go." Ballins lightly shouted and took the lead to leave. Sanguiner and Gilbert closely followed behind. After obtaining the divine essences, Ballins and the other two had demonstrated sufficient strength. Those from the 7th Corps knew that they were no match for them and therefore, they did not put up any last-ditch struggle. They could only watch helplessly as Ballins and the other two left. At the sand table at the center of Soaring Cloud Mountain Range, Batuk forced a smile and shook his head. He said, "I accept my defeat wholeheartedly. There was no fluke involved in this battle. From start to finish, the 5th Corps had maintained an absolute advantage. They did not give Tuno and the others the slightest chance to retaliate." Although Batuk was somewhat indignant, when Ballins and the other two obtained the divine essences and did not harm a single person from the 7th Corps, Batuk was relieved. Lord Batuk need not take it to heart. It was just a fluke. Han Shuo put on a faint smile and said gently, "Anyone could see that the strength of the 5th Corps had completely overwhelmed that of the 7th Corps. There was no fluke involved at all. Everyone knew that Han Shuo was being modest." Batuk felt a little better when he saw that Han Shuo was not arrogant and modest. He shook his head with a wry smile and did not say anything else. Erebus suddenly stepped forward and patted Han Shuo's shoulder. He said in a low voice, "You are truly unfathomable." After a short pause, Erebus glanced at Ralph, who had an ugly expression on his face, and said softly, "It seems that what you said at Aobashi's place was not just arrogant talk. Brian, take down the 2nd Corps." Aobashi walked over from Andre's side and said in a low voice. Han Shuo nodded with a calm smile and said confidently, "Don't worry. As long as the two sides fight, the 5th Corps will definitely be the winner." "Humph." Ralph shot a cold glance at Han Shuo from not far away. Everyone present could see that the 5th Corps was the only force that could contend against the 2nd Corps. Ralph had always been unpopular. The strength of the 2nd Corps was the foundation that allowed him to gain a foothold in the City of Shadows. If the 2nd Corps were defeated by Han Shuo in the competition, it would definitely be a huge blow to Ralph. Most of the people present were either rich or powerful. However, most of them disliked Ralph. In their hearts, they could not wait for Ralph to suffer a crushing defeat. Their gazes were filled with schadenfreude when they looked at Ralph. "The 2nd Corps and the 4th Corps are fighting," Rugersi suddenly exclaimed in a low voice. The crowd, each with their own thoughts, immediately turned their attention back to the sand table. Through the map on the sand table, they could clearly see that the 2nd Corps was aggressively attacking the 4th Corps. The 2nd Corps had always been ruthless. Although they did not kill anyone directly, injuring someone was a common occurrence for them. On the way to the location of the 4th Corps' divine essences, under Kiffin's leadership, the 2nd Corps divine guards who had survived the massacre would surely injure at least one member of the 4th Corps. In just a few moments, many of the 4th Corps divine guards had their limbs broken. As long as it was a competition, there would always be accidental injuries. In order to ensure that both sides could be at ease during the competition, there would be a quota for casualties. Although it was strictly forbidden to kill in a competition, minor injuries were still allowed. One of the main reasons why the Second Corps had always been unpopular was due to the fact that they would injure people at every competition. Everyone could see that the Second Corps was stronger than the Fourth Corps in terms of combat strength. With such a huge disparity in strength, the Second Corps could simply snatch the divine essences without injuring anyone. But the Second Corps Divine Guards did not do so. For those who did not even care about the lives of their comrades in the cruel training, injuring someone was already considered very merciful to them. As the number of injured Divine Guards of the Fourth Corps increased, the Chief of Divine Guard Camilla's face grew uglier and uglier. She tried her best to suppress the anger in her heart and stared at the sand table with a gloomy face. She hated Ralph to the bone. In the same competition, Han Shua's Fifth Corps Divine Guards did not injure a single one of Batuk's Divine Guards. Camilla, on the other hand, was feeling even more displeased. Batuk, on the other hand, was secretly rejoicing. It's the same every time. Erebus softly sighed and muttered to himself, "There's clearly no need for him to injure people. Once he loses power in the City of Shadows, I'm afraid that everyone will come to kick him when he's down." Erebus' words seemed to imply something. Han Shua couldn't help but turn his head to look at Ralph. He thought to himself, "This fella is indeed a lunatic." After today's competition, Han Shua will have to make plans in advance to prevent Ralph from doing anything crazy. The Second Corps was indeed not a force that the Fourth Corps could handle. After a dozen or so minutes, after injuring many of the Fourth Corps Divine Guards, the Second Corps had successfully plundered all the divine essences of the Fourth Corps. After that, the Second Corps went out of control and plundered the divine essences of Rugersi's Sixth Corps. Then came Erebus' Third Corps. Although the Third Corps was slightly stronger than the Sixth and Fourth Corps, they were still no match for the Second Corps. After losing a dozen or so Divine Guards, the Third Corps was defeated. Rugersi, Camilla, and Erebus wore ugly faces. Their eyes were glistening with killing intent when they looked at Ralph. However, Ralph remained unfazed. It was at this moment that the Fifth Corps Divine Guards suddenly accelerated forward. They were charging towards the Second Corps from another direction. The eyes of Wallace, Andre, Rugersi, Erebus, and the others suddenly lit up. They turned their attention to the Fifth Corps. They were looking forward to the clash between the Fifth and Second Corps. Chapter 793. In everyone's eyes, only the Fifth Corps could contend against the Second Corps. Even Aobashi could not deny this. The Divine Guard chiefs of the City of Shadows were well aware of each other's strengths. They all knew how terrifying the Second Corps trained by Ralph were. Although Aobashi's First Corps had yet to engage in battle with the Second Corps, based on the records of past battles and the performance of the Second Corps, no one believed that the First Corps could defeat the Second Corps. Only the performance of the Fifth Corps this year had made everyone's eyes light up. They had cleanly broken into the Seventh Corps and obtained the Divine Crystals. Their strength was extraordinary. From the looks of it, only the Fifth Corps could truly suppress Ralph's Second Corps. With that thought in mind, the crowd's gazes were gathered on the sand table. They were fully focused on the two forces that were about to meet. Han Shua was wearing an indifferent smile on his face. Having been tempered by the 8 Desolation and Torment formation and nurtured by Cauldron Spirit, his Divine Guards had mastered simple demonic formations that could coordinate with each other. When they were grouped in groups of 2 or 3, they could unleash their full potential. Although the Divine Guards trained by the Second Corps possessed astonishing battle strength, in a real battle, it still depended on the teamwork of the whole team. In this aspect, Han Shua believed that the Fifth Corps would surpass the Second Corps. In addition, Balans, Sanguiner, and Gilbert possessed extraordinary strength. Sanguiner and Balans, in particular, possessed unique offensive techniques. Han Shua was certain that Sanguiner, Gilbert could play an unimaginable role at a critical moment. The Fifth Corps' target was the Second Corps. Similarly, after seizing the divine essences from the Fourth Corps, Kiffin followed Ralph's instructions and went to the Fifth Corps. As the distance between the two forces rapidly shortened, a battle was inevitable. When the two forces were about to meet, Han Shuo felt rather uneasy. Through the sand table, the crowd could clearly see the changes in the arena. Han Shuo was afraid that Balins and the others would do something irrational and alert Wallace and the others. Ralph was even more nervous than Han Shuo because he had given Kiffin the order to kill the 5th Corps Divine Guards. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, if Kiffin intended to kill someone, there was no way he could escape. However, it was too late. There was nothing that Han Shuo and Ralph could do to change the situation. The battle unavoidably broke out. Kiffin and his 2nd Corps Divine Guards charged forward in an imposing manner. Before they got close, Kiffin coldly shouted, "Charge! No need to be so courteous." The 2nd Corps Divine Guards had seized divine essences from the 4th, 6th, and 3rd Corps. At this moment, their morale was soaring. Every one of them was brimming with murderous intent. They had survived through the cruelest of trials and tribulations. Individually, they were stronger than any other corps of divine guards. It was indeed very imposing for them to charge at Han Shuo with cold faces. Balins gestured with his hand and calmly instructed, "The 2nd Corps cannot be compared to the 7th Corps. Adopt a defensive stance." The Divine Guards of the 5th Corps, who had survived the 8 Desolation and Torment formation, had tempered their willpower to become extremely firm. They were not affected by the murderous aura of the 2nd Corps in the slightest. Following Balin's instructions, the Divine Guards of the 5th Corps immediately spread out and formed a ring. After creating a passageway, they quietly waited for the murderous attackers of the 2nd Corps. Let them in first. At such a crucial moment, Balins continuously gave precise orders, unlike when he had faced the 7th Bureau, where he had charged in recklessly. All the 5th Corps Divine Guards gazed at the 2nd Corps Divine Guards charging at them with cold eyes. Following Balin's instruction, they once again changed their formation in an orderly fashion. A circular passageway that could only fit 5 or 6 people side by side appeared. Every Divine Guard was only 2 or 3 meters apart from each other. It was the most suitable distance for them to provide support and attack. When viewed from the sand table, the troops of the 5th Corps resembled a demonic pattern that was rapidly changing. In the blink of an eye, they lined up neatly and neatly. When Han Shuo lowered his head to take a look, he would see that every Divine Guard was at the same distance from each other. They were spread out to form a ring that seemed to have been measured by some kind of equipment. It was extremely accurate. Traces of astonishment flashed across the crowd's eyes. Putting aside the actual combat strength of the 5th Corps, just from the tacit understanding and orderly formation of the 5th Corps Divine Guards, one could tell how difficult it was to train a division of Divine Guards to such a level. Just from the formation, it was as though every Divine Guard knew what position they should be in and how they should exert their strength to the fullest. Truly remarkable. That was the thought in almost everyone's mind. Ralph was a man who knew what was good and what was bad. Just by lowering his head to look at the tacit coordination of the 5th Corps Divine Guards, he could tell that the 5th Corps had spent a great deal of time and effort on team coordination. It was this kind of team that could exert their full strength that was the most frightening. For some reason, Ralph suddenly felt uneasy when he saw his Divine Guards charging into the formation with great confidence. The battle broke out in an instant. The first to attack was not the 2nd Corps but the 5th Corps Divine Guards, who had taken defensive measures. As soon as Kiffin and his 2nd Corps Divine Guards charged into the center of the ring, Balins coldly waved his hand. Before Kiffin and his Divine Guards could get ready, the 5th Corps Divine Guards around them started launching all kinds of attacks at them. Sanguiner and Gilbert took the lead and charged straight at Kiffin. Balins did not join the battle. Instead, he constantly shouted and commanded his Divine Guards to surround and attack the 2nd Corps Divine Guards. As the commander of this battle, Balins did not act rashly. He wisely mobilized the strength of his team and surrounded the 2nd Corps Divine Guards. Although the individual combat strength of the 2nd Corps was slightly higher than that of the 5th Corps, their teamwork could not be compared to that of the 5th Corps. With the tacit coordination of the Divine Guards, wave after wave of attacks rained down on the 2nd Corps Divine Guards. No one from the 2nd Corps had the chance to retaliate. The order that Han Shuo gave to Balins was very simple. Kill as many of the 2nd Corps Divine Guards as you can. Balins faithfully carried out Han Shuo's order. He ordered his divine guards to attack with all their might. Wave after wave of attacks rained down. Several of the second corps divine guards who could not dodge in time were injured. Beautiful. This is what true teamwork looks like. Camilla cheered with a face full of joy. She looked at Han Shuo with delight and said, "I've really learned something new today. Everyone in your 5th Corps truly thinks of themselves as a member of the team. No one leaves the team, and you've accurately blocked every gap that's suitable for them to charge in. You're indeed extraordinary." After taking a short pause, Camilla shot a disdainful glance at Ralph, who was wearing an ugly expression, and said, "Comparatively speaking, the other party is only slightly stronger in individual combat strength. Their teamwork is clearly far inferior to the 5th Corps." Camilla's 4th Corps had suffered severe losses at the hands of Kiffin and the others. She was obviously very happy to see that the enemy was also suffering. She kept provoking Ralph with her sarcastic remarks. Rugersi and Erebus, who had also suffered great losses at Ralph's hands, of course, would not hold back. Erebus immediately agreed. "That's right. It seems that there will always be someone stronger than you. I reckon that the 2nd Corps will have to give up the title of the strongest in combat strength. I think that the so-called number 1 in combat strength only refers to the strength of individual divine guards. Judging from the current situation, they also don't know how to bring out the full strength of a team." Rugersi also took the opportunity to ridicule them. The 3 of them were overjoyed. They felt that Han Shuo had helped them vent their frustrations. They stared fixedly at Ralph and kept making sarcastic remarks, causing Ralph's face to turn uglier and uglier. Ralph understood that it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. Although he was extremely furious, he did not refute. Otherwise, he would not only be ridiculed by Erebus and the other 2, but also by the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans. He had offended too many people. "All right, are you guys tired?" Wallace was the first to lose his patience. He bunched his brows and softly asked. As soon as Wallace opened his mouth, Erebus and the others tactfully shut their mouths. They forced a smile and continued to watch the sand table attentively. Their faces were filled with complacency, as though they had gotten their revenge. "You guys, just you wait." Ralph gnashed his teeth in his heart. His face was ice cold. He was thinking about how he should teach them a lesson after today's duel. "Someone's dead," Andre suddenly shouted in a low voice. The crowd was immediately stunned. They immediately stopped their teasing and turned their attention back to the sand table with solemn faces. A 2nd Corps Divine Guard had collapsed to the ground after being bombarded by the rain of attacks. Although he looked like a tiny black on the sand table, his motionless appearance was enough to prove that he was dead. Otherwise, he would have been fleeing in panic. Wallace's face jolted. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Han Shuo. His eyes seemed to be questioning Han Shuo. Han Shuo put on a bitter smile and shrugged at Wallace, indicating that he too did not know how this happened. However, in his heart, Han Shuo felt rather uneasy. He shouldn't have died. Andre spoke again. After taking a short pause, he explained. If his teammates had stepped in to help him, he would only have suffered minor injuries. But at the critical moment, his teammates coldly retreated. It was their own men who killed him. Wallace was slightly taken aback when he heard this. The 2nd Corps had always been known for their ferocious attacks in team battles. Many of their weaknesses were covered up by their terrifying individual abilities. Because of the 2nd Corps' amazing combat power, they usually had the upper hand in a real battle. They had never been as passive as they were this time, so the coldness between their comrades was not exposed. Andre's words had undoubtedly pushed the blame onto the 2nd Corps. Han Shuo felt a little relieved. He turned to Andre with a faint smile. He knew that with Andre's explanation, Wallace would never blame Han Shuo. "Another one dead." Batuk cried out in alarm. He raised his head and looked at Ralph. He said, "The situation is the same as before. It seems that your men never come to the rescue of their teammates when they are in danger. Is this your so-called team strength?" Chapter 794. The crowd lowered their heads and looked at the sand table. They discovered that more and more 2nd Corps Divine Guards were either killed or injured. They could clearly see that the second corps divine guards were acting abnormally coldly and indifferently towards each other despite the storm of attacks from Han Shua's divine guards. They did not care about the lives and deaths of those around them. It was because of this selfless attitude that those second corps divine guards who could have dodged the attacks with only minor injuries were either severely injured or killed. They were selfish and had no team spirit at all. Ralph's face grew uglier and uglier. The training of these divine guards was extremely cruel. In a situation where everyone around them could be their enemy, the second corps divine guards had zero trust in each other. They did not even have the most basic trust in each other, much less perfect teamwork. Once this flaw was exposed, it was too late to remedy it. Ballins had received special instructions from Han Shua beforehand. He calmly issued one cruel order after another. More and more attacks rained down. The second corps divine guards suffered heavy casualties. Interesting. How interesting. Aobashi cried out. She looked at Ralph coldly and ridiculed. What you have trained are not divine guards but a bunch of death sworn. It is true that they possess outstanding strength and are not afraid of death, but they do not know how to cooperate with those around them. You have lost this battle from the very beginning. Wallace shot a cold glance at Ralph but did not reply. For the first time, he started to doubt Ralph's method of training. The battle continued. The second corps divine guards were indeed extraordinary in combat strength. They did not show the slightest sign of retreating despite the ferocious attacks from the fifth corps. Every single one of them continued to charge towards the divine essences of the fifth corps without fear of death. Sanguiner, Gilbert, and Kiffin were engaged in battle. Kiffin led 5 divine guards and intercepted Sanguiner and Gilbert. Kiffin and his 5 divine guards did not seem to care about the injuries to their bodies. They stared at Sanguiner and Gilbert with ice-cold eyes. Every attack they launched had no regard for the rules of battle. It was obvious that they were determined to take the lives of Sanguiner and Gilbert. The Sanguiner duo were naturally not to be trifled with. They had heard Ballins's orders earlier and were very clear about Han Shua's intentions. Just like Kiffin and the others, Sanguis and Gilbert were also using ruthless techniques to kill. The few of them were locked in a stalemate, and it was hard to tell who would win. Most of the second corps divine guards were unable to charge out of Ballins and the others' attack range. Every divine guard who tried to charge into the fray would be met with even fiercer and denser attacks. Every single one of them would suffer the same fate, death or injury. The fifth corps divine guards cooperated with tacit understanding. Every one of them found their own positions on the battlefield and attacked in an orderly manner according to Ballins's instructions. The second corps was unable to break through the encirclement for the time being. As time went by, the situation became more and more disadvantageous for the second corps. Under such circumstances, the wisest course of action for the second corps was to retreat as soon as possible, leave the divine crystals behind, and not put up any more pointless resistance. However, that was not what the second corps thought. Not a single person from the second corps retreated. They disregarded their own lives and continued to charge forward recklessly. More and more of the second corps divine guards were injured. The number of casualties had far exceeded the quota for each battle. Ralph, order your men to give up. Andre suddenly shouted. He stared at Ralph in a solemn face and said, "If this goes on, your second corps will be wiped out." "No, they haven't lost yet," Ralph shouted loudly. His face was filled with stubbornness and stubbornness. At this point, everyone could see that the second corps was at a disadvantage. As the casualties of the second corps increased, their combat strength grew weaker and weaker. On the contrary, Han Shua's side was full of vigor and vigor. The outcome of the second corps had long been decided. Perhaps Ralph had never thought that he would lose, but he still couldn't let go of his stubbornness and was unwilling to admit defeat. Therefore, he continued to persevere. "Serves you right," Carmelita rejoiced. She raised her head and giggled at Han Shua. She appeared to be very happy. "Ralph, order your men to stop." Wallace finally couldn't stand it any longer, and he shouted in a deep voice. Ralph was one of Wallace's most loyal lackeys. He obeyed no one in the City of Shadows except for Wallace's orders. Although Ralph wore an unwilling face, he took out a magic messaging crystal and contacted Kiffin under the watchful eyes of the crowd. He ordered Kiffin to stop the senseless attack. What a bunch of lunatics! Balin secretly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the Second Corps Divine Guards had stopped their senseless attack. If they allowed the situation to continue, the frenzied Divine Guards of the Second Corps could very well be wiped out. That was not an outcome that Han Shua wished to see. Damn it! Why did they suddenly give up? Keep going. God damn it, keep going. Gilbert cursed and pointed at Kiffin and the others. He had been suppressing a bellyful of anger for not being able to finish off Kiffin and the others. Of the 100 Second Corps members, only less than 30 remained unscathed. More than 20 had died, and nearly 50 had sustained light or severe injuries. Their overall combat strength was far from what it was before. On the other hand, every member of the 5th Corps under Han Shua's command appeared calm and collected. Only a dozen or so of them sustained light injuries. Not a single one was seriously injured or killed. It was clear who was stronger and who was weaker. The crowd looked at Han Shua in astonishment. They did not expect that the 5th Corps would possess such terrifying combat strength. I think there's no point in continuing. Aobashi put on a bitter smile and said to Wallace, the 1st Corps will not be a match for Brian's subordinates. Having watched for so long, Aobashi had a good idea of the strength of the 5th Corps. With the perfect coordination of the 5th Corps, the 2nd Corps was routed in a single blow. Aobashi did not think that her subordinates would be much stronger than the 2nd Corps. Since they were going to lose anyway, she might as well end things quickly. The 1st Corps was the only force that had yet to fight. All the other 6 Corps had displayed their strengths. The spectators knew very well how strong they were. Aobashi's words meant that she had given up. With that, it could be said that the 5th Corps had won. The crowd had nothing to say about the strength of the 5th Corps. Now that Aobashi had given up, Wallace nodded and announced in a deep voice, there's no need to continue the fight. The 5th Corps wins. Thank you, thank you. Han Shua was all smiles as he nodded at the crowd. When he saw Ralph, the smile on Han Shua's face became even more cheerful. He laughed loudly and said, my apologies, Lord Ralph. It seems that my subordinates have done a better job than I expected. Ralph's face was slightly distorted as though someone had stepped on it. Under the mocking gazes of his opponents, Ralph had the urge to charge at Han Shua and fight him. With great difficulty, Ralph looked at Han Shua and slowly nodded. He said, I will make you regret this during the Divine Guard Chief's competition. The smile in Han Shua's eyes intensified. He calmly said, very well. I too look forward to fighting you. Brian, Wallace suddenly shouted. His face was rather unpleasant. He stared at Han Shua and said, how do you explain the deaths of so many of the 2nd Corps' men? Manslaughter, Han Shua immediately declared. He put on an aggrieved face and said, Lord Andre has just said that these are the 2nd Corps' men's fault. Their deaths have nothing to do with us. The first few can be considered manslaughter, but your men, who clearly know the 2nd Corps' style, not only did they not restrain themselves, they even intensified their attacks. How can this be considered manslaughter? Wallace's face turned dark, and he shouted in a low voice. That. Han Shua was speechless. He did not know how to respond. Brother, you can't blame Brian for this. The 2nd Corps' style of doing things is too ruthless. Their men are not afraid of death. If Brian's men weren't more ruthless, they would have mercilessly attacked Brian's men once they broke out of the encirclement. Under such circumstances, they had no choice but to do so. Andre had always disliked Ralph, but he was very considerate of Han Shua. This time was no exception. He immediately spoke up for Han Shua. After Andre spoke up, Rugersi, Camilla, Erebus, Aobashi, Batuk, and even the patriarchs of the 3 major families spoke up to express their opinions. They all said that although the 5th Corps' actions were a little reckless, they were not wrong. Not a single one of them pleaded for Ralph's men. Ralph stood alone, his cold eyes sweeping across the crowd. Han Shua smiled bitterly, but he was inwardly overjoyed. He thought that Ralph deserved it. Who asked him to be so inhumane? With so many people pleading for Han Shua's life, and knowing that the goddess of fortune had a good impression of Han Shua, Wallace did not intend to punish him severely. In the end, He only reprimanded Han Shuo and reminded Han Shuo to be more careful next time, and not to be so ruthless towards his own men. Han Shuo, of course, was tactful. He repeatedly nodded and said that he would definitely reprimand his disobedient subordinates. Just like that, the matter was left unsettled. One party was happy while the other was sullen. Under Wallace's command, Andre dispatched a messenger to the fighting area and announced the end of the team competition. Wallace did not take back the divine essences obtained by each team. All the divine essences were given to the winning team as a reward. Soon enough, the few teams in the fighting area received their orders. Under the gazes of the crowd, the teams left the fighting area in thin lines and returned to their respective residences. The team competition ended prematurely. Wallace did not start the competition between the Divine Guard chiefs immediately. He ordered everyone to return to their residences to rest. The competition between the Divine Guard chiefs would be held 3 days later. The crowd dispersed. Some were happy, some were sighing, and some were filled with resentment. As the Divine Guard chiefs left, Wallace suddenly shot a glance at Ralph and nodded. Ralph did not leave but stayed in silence. He knew that Wallace had something to tell him. Chapter 795. Although Ralph was unkind to everyone, his loyalty to Wallace was unquestionable. Therefore, even though no one liked Ralph, Wallace still trusted him. One by one, the Divine Guard chiefs and family patriarchs left. When Andre saw that Ralph was left alone, he knew that his brother Wallace had something to say to him. "Let's go, Carmelita," said Andre with a smile. Carmelita tactfully followed behind them, leaving the area to Wallace and Ralph. "You don't have to worry about what happened today," Wallace comforted Ralph as he gazed deeply into the eyes of Ralph. "My lord, I can't accept this." Ralph lowered his head and let out an aggrieved cry. Then, he suddenly raised his head and said to Wallace, "The Second Corps Divine Guards have been trained under your lordship's orders. The Second Corps has always carried out the most dangerous missions. The privileges of our Second Corps have been earned by piling up human lives. There is no luck involved." "I understand." Wallace nodded with a sullen face and said, "The existence of the Second Corps has solved many of the problems in the City of Shadows. Its position will not be affected too much. Don't worry about that." After taking a short pause, Wallace continued to console Ralph. "No matter what, the Second Corps is the true force of our House of Saint. Although the Fifth Corps is powerful, its master is still Brian. He belongs to the Han family. Do you understand what I mean?" Ralph stared blankly for a moment before he replied, "Yes, I understand." No matter what, Ralph's Second Corps was a force under Wallace's control. This force was also a safeguard for Wallace to stabilize his power and position. To Wallace, Ralph's unpopularity was exactly what he wanted to see. He needed someone like Ralph to intimidate the other family clans. As the City Lord of the City of Shadows, there were many things that Wallace could not do that were too extreme. Most of the time, it would be Ralph who dealt with those whom he could not stand. As a result, Ralph became the biggest villain in the city. In fact, this was all Wallace's doing. Because of the special nature of Ralph's work, it was destined that he would never become a friend of the 3 major family clans, nor would he gain the approval of the majority of the House of Saint. Everything was under Wallace's control. It was Wallace's order that led to Ralph's current predicament. After hearing Wallace's words, Ralph understood that even if everyone in the City of Shadows hated him, Wallace, the City Lord, would still protect him. Because he and the Second Bureau existed for Wallace. Just as he and the Second Bureau relied on Wallace, Wallace also needed him. "As long as you understand." Wallace put on a faint smile and said, "Therefore, regardless of whether you win or lose this battle, your authority and status in the City of Shadows will not be affected." "Understood, my lord." Ralph was relieved. Soon after, he sneered and said, "I will teach him a lesson in the competition of Divine Guard chiefs 3 days from now." Wallace shook his head and looked at Ralph pitifully. He softly sighed and said, "Forget it. You are no match for him in a fight between Divine Guard chiefs." Wallace knew that Han Shuo could even injure Hafs of Hushvale City. Hafs was a late-stage high god and was obviously stronger than Ralph. If Han Shuo could defeat Hafs, How could Ralph possibly be a match for Han Shua? That's impossible. I'm confident. Ralph said confidently and solemnly, "Rest assured, my lord, I will defeat him." Wallace would not tell Ralph about the fact that Han Shua had defeated Hafs. Although he already knew the truth, it would not be appropriate for him to say too much about it. Otherwise, it might have the opposite effect. Wallace had no choice but to remind Ralph to be careful. After being comforted by Wallace, Ralph felt a little more at ease. With the thought of revenge in 3 days, he left the place and prepared to reprimand his subordinates for their defeat. Aobashi and Erebus arrived at the 5th Corps' assembly grounds in high spirits. They came to celebrate with Han Shua with fine wine in their hands. Erebus, in particular, wore an overjoyed face as though it was his subordinate who had defeated the 2nd Corps. "Huh, you are?" As soon as Erebus arrived at the 5th Corps, he noticed Spider Goddess Rose standing beside Han Shua. As a cultivator of the energy of darkness, Erebus could immediately sense how terrifying Rose was. As Han Shua had been worried that someone might recognize Rose, he would normally not bring Rose to places with many outsiders. Therefore, it was only now that Erebus and Aobashi saw Rose. Aobashi was also startled. She secretly sensed for a moment and immediately realized that this beautiful woman with a black veil on her head possessed strength on par with hers. Since when did this kid have such an expert by his side? Both Erebus and Aobashi were very surprised. They exchanged glances with each other, and the same thought came to their minds. "She is my Han family's guard, Rose." Han Shua introduced Rose to the two smilingly. In front of outsiders, Rose was as cold and detached as ever. After nodding at Erebus and Aobashi, Rose left without saying a word. The area was extremely vast. The divine guards of the 5th Corps who had just returned were scattered all over the place. In the blink of an eye, Rose was nowhere to be found. "Impressive, Brian. Your Han family has just been established. How did you manage to recruit an expert of this level?" Erebus exclaimed in admiration. He casually tossed a bottle of fine wine to Han Shua and smilingly said, "Kid, you are just too incredible. I thought that Ralph's 2nd Corps would always be above everyone's head. I didn't expect that you would be the one to settle it. How long has it been since your 5th Corps was established?" "I did not expect that you would rise to power so quickly. Brian, you have a bright future ahead of you," praised Aobashi smilingly. "Huh. Isn't this Lord Erebus and Lord Aobashi? Haha, I have just arrived today. I heard that Lord Brian has defeated the 2nd Corps and avenged my auntie. Therefore, I have come to express my gratitude to Lord Brian." An elegant voice sounded from afar. Jia of the House of Kinson flew over gracefully. She wore a faint, elegant smile on her pretty face. Han Shua was stunned. He did not expect that this beauty from the House of Kinson would come to express her gratitude. Most of the divine guards of the 4th Corps were injured by Kiffin and his men. When Han Shua and Ralph clashed, Camilla was the one who defended Han Shua the most. She was very grateful to Han Shua's 5th Corps for teaching Kiffin and his men a bloody lesson. "Is Lord Brian not welcoming me?" asked Jia in a rather uneasy voice when she saw that Han Shua was standing there in a daze. "Of course you welcome a beautiful lady. Haha. It's just that there aren't any clean places in the camp. I was afraid that I might neglect Miss Jia," replied Han Shua with a big laugh. "Lord Brian is too courteous." Jia put on a faint smile. Her bright eyes swept across the divine guards behind Han Shua, especially when she looked at Balans, Sanguiner, and Gilbert. She looked at them for a while longer before she exclaimed in admiration, "Lord Brian has trained the 5th Corps divine guards to such an extent in such a short period of time. It is truly unfathomable. They are talented." "I did not do much," replied Han Shua in a very modest manner. He chatted casually with Jia, who had come without warning. Jia's appearance was outstanding and graceful. As soon as she arrived, all the divine guards around her gathered their gazes on her. Their faces were filled with ambiguous expressions. From their point of view, Jia, a famous beauty in the City of Shadows, had come all the way to Han Shua's doorstep. They were secretly envious of Han Shua's luck with women as the new chief of divine guards. Rose too was a beauty, but unfortunately, Rose was cold and indifferent to everyone. The divine guards had all witnessed Rose's inhuman strength. Therefore, every one of them was trembling with fear and trepidation when they saw Rose. They did not dare to look at Rose with impudent gazes, fearing that Rose would teach them a lesson. Yet, Rose, an extremely beautiful woman with outstanding strength, was obedient and docile to Han Shuo. No matter how Han Shuo ordered her, she would obey him obediently. And now, Han Shuo had quite a few beauties in the Han family. Each and every one of them was dazzling and dazzling. All of them were true beauties that could only be found once in 1,000. To be able to make so many beauties get along harmoniously with each other, and to have more and more beauties come to him of their own volition, it was not something that an ordinary person could do. To these divine guards, although Han Shuo possessed valiant strength, his ability to tame women was even more admirable. He was a man, after all. Their obsessions in certain areas were irrational. They all thought that Han Shuo's methods with women had already reached the acme of perfection. When the divine guards saw that Han Shuo was smiling and chatting cheerfully with Jia in a relaxed and carefree manner, they became more attentive than ever. They secretly memorized every word that Han Shuo said. They were prepared to go back and study Han Shuo's words so that they could improve their skills in this field. After Jia joined the conversation, Han Shuo was no longer as unscrupulous as before. After smiling and feigning civility for a while, Jia took the initiative to leave. Before she left, she repeatedly said that she admired a character like Han Shuo the most. She looked at Han Shuo with a gaze that seemed to be hinting at something. That chick is interested in you. As soon as Jia left, Erebus, whose face was flushed from drinking, immediately said in a strange smile, "Nonsense. I think her main purpose of coming here is to express goodwill to me. She hopes that she can share more of the medicines that I personally refine with her family clan." Han Shuo said smilingly, "Look at you. You obviously know what's going on, but you pretend to be ignorant. Youngster, you are indeed a scoundrel." Aobashi glared at Han Shuo and groaned, "But you can indeed be proud of yourself. That chick Jia has her eyes on the top of her head in the City of Shadows. I have never heard of her flirting with any young man. Now that she has come to you alone to express her gratitude, it would be strange if she said that she isn't interested in you." Han Shuo shrugged and said, "What does that have to do with me? I have enough women in my house. I get a headache whenever I see a beautiful woman. I hope she won't bother me." Aobashi glared at Han Shuo with her hands on her hips and said, "You get a headache whenever you see me?" "No," replied Han Shuo hastily. Upon hearing those words, the anger on Aobashi's face grew even more intense. She cursed in her heart. "Are you saying that I'm not a beautiful woman?" Aobashi was enraged. Chapter 796. "Of course not," Han Shuo hastily explained. "In my heart, you and Erebus are a couple. So, hee." After hearing those words from Han Shuo, Aobashi couldn't help but turn her head to glance at Erebus, who was looking at her affectionately. For some unknown reason, Aobashi felt that Erebus was lacking something that attracted her. She couldn't fall for Erebus no matter what. "I don't feel anything for him," Aobashi replied with her brows bunched in front of Erebus. Erebus, who had long gotten used to Aobashi's blunt tone, did not mind it at all. Even his affectionate gaze when he looked at Aobashi did not change in the slightest. Han Shuo despised Erebus. He thought to himself, Erebus is a reputable character in the City of Shadows. Why is he so spineless when facing Aobashi? Be careful of Ralph. That fella is a vengeful person, but he does have some strength. You must not let your guard down in the Divine Guard competition in 3 days. You must be prepared for Ralph's revenge. Aobashi cautioned Han Shuo while avoiding Erebus's affectionate gaze. If Aobashi knew that Han Shuo could injure City Lord Hoffs of Hushvale City like Wallace did, she wouldn't have spent so much effort in persuading Han Shuo. Instead, she might have started to worry about her own safety. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," replied Han Shuo smilingly as he nodded. Han Shuo had a very good impression of Aobashi and Erebus. The two did not hold any prejudice against Han Shuo because of their status and identity. On the contrary, they had helped him in many things. Aobashi and Erebus did not stay for long. After chatting with Han Shuo for a while, they bade farewell and left. The Divine Guard competition in 3 days was of utmost importance. Even Aobashi and Erebus had to make preparations to avoid unexpected failure. After the two left, Gilbert, Sanguiner, Ballins, Barnard, and the rest of the 5th Corps Divine Guards came to greet Han Shuo. Barnard was in charge of handing the spoils of war to Han Shuo and said, "My lord, these are our spoils." As most of the participants cultivated in the energy of death, destruction, and darkness, the divine essences that Wallace placed in the fighting area were of these 3 types. These divine essences were very useful to the 5th Corps Divine Guards. Barnard did not use any of them but handed them all in. This was a testament to the strict discipline of the 5th Corps. To Han Shuo, divine crystals that could increase his divine power were not of much use to him. After devouring the divine power of a few gods in Hushvale City, his avatars were already full of divine power. What he lacked now was the comprehension of his realm, not the divine crystals that could increase his divine power. You don't have to hand it over. You can distribute it among yourselves. Han Shuo shook his head and did not take the divine essences that Barnard handed over. Bernard's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly said, "My lord, these are divine crystals, and you can directly absorb the divine power inside them. Why doesn't my lord want them?" "I don't need them." Han Shuo put on a faint smile and straightforwardly said, "For the time being, I don't need the divine crystals to increase my divine energy. You have performed outstandingly in this battle. You have earned the divine crystals with your own abilities. You should distribute them among yourselves." When Han Shuo saw that Barnard was still hesitating, he impatiently said, "All right, enough with the nonsense. Take them and distribute them. You are the captain. You can decide how to distribute them." "Mr. Ballins." Barnard stared blankly for a moment and looked at Ballins in a somewhat awkward manner. Ballins had played the most crucial role in the battle, and Barnard had great trust in him. In addition to the relationship between Ballins and Han Shuo, Barnard, who was uncertain about Han Shuo's decision, wanted to ask for Han Shuo's opinion. "Whatever my senior says," said Ballins arrogantly as he swept a cold glance at Barnard. "Why do you have so much nonsense to say? Master has spoken. Hurry up and distribute the divine crystals," said Gilbert impatiently when he saw that Barnard was restless. Yes, yes. Barnard was finally overjoyed. He carried the divine essences in his hand and rushed to the divine guards nearby. He cried out in surprise, "His lordship wants us to divide the divine essences. His lordship wants us to divide the divine essences." Cheers suddenly sounded from the divine guards. The divine guards surrounded Barnard in an instant. Their greedy gazes were focused on the divine crystals in Barnard's hand. From time to time, they would glance at Han Shuo with faces full of admiration. When Avery was in charge, all the good stuff from the 5th Corps would be handed to him. He would only distribute the stuff that he doesn't need to his divine guards. Explained Ballins to Han Shuo. He was very familiar with the temperament of the chiefs of divine guards in the City of Shadows. He explained to Han Shuo, Senior's way of doing things is inconceivable to them. Everyone knows how precious divine crystals are. Even if Senior doesn't need them, he can always sell them for a large amount of black crystal coins. I'm afraid that none of the chiefs of divine guards in the City of Shadows would do such a thing. Han Shuo immediately understood after hearing Ballin's explanation. He thought to himself that he had been too generous. Now that the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy was making tens of thousands of gold coins a day, Han Shuo did not have much concept of crystal coins. Han Shuo, who was used to devouring experts to obtain divine energy, did not need to rely on divine crystals. Therefore, he was so generous. Han Shuo did not expect that his generous gesture would win the heartfelt support and gratitude of the divine guards. With just a casual glance, Han Shuo could see that the divine guards were becoming more and more respectful and worshipping towards him. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before the 5th Corps became the Han family's personal guards. That was the outcome that Han Shuo wanted to see the most. With a thought, Han Shuo suddenly realized that these divine guards were actually very easy to control. All he had to do was make them submit to him wholeheartedly in terms of martial strength and conquer them in terms of personal charisma. All he had to do was give them a few extra benefits, and they would submit to him obediently and serve him wholeheartedly. Senior, each and every one of them is very good. In time, they will all become talents who can hold their own. Ballins had been with Han Shuo for a long time. In addition to his extraordinary experience, he could tell at a glance what Han Shuo was thinking. Han Shuo put on a faint smile and nodded. Soon after, he looked deeply at Ballins and said, "You have to put in more effort. These first batch of divine guards who came out of the 8 Desolation and Torment formation will become the most solid foundation of our Han family. Don't worry, Senior. I will make sure that they will no longer consider themselves divine guards of the 5th Corps, but a part of the Han family." Ballins put on a solemn face and guaranteed. Han Shuo was very confident in Ballins's work. After conversing with Han Shuo in a low voice for a while, Han Shuo told Ballins to look for Phoebe or Han Shuo if he needed any crystal coins or medicines. As long as he could get this batch of talents, it would be worth it to invest some crystal coins and medicines. Ballins indicated that he understood. Those divine guards had great trust in him. There shouldn't be any problems in leaving this task to Han Shuo. Sanguiner unceasingly described the greatness of the broadsword in his hand to Han Shuo. He told him how handy the blood-red broadsword refined by Han Shuo was, and how powerful the amplification effect it had on his blood god mantra. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the broadsword. The broadsword refined from blood crystals was tailor-made for Sanguiner. It would be strange if he didn't like it. After listening to Sanguiner's excitement, Han Shuo gave him a few words of consolation and told him to learn more about the wondrous uses of the broadsword. After that, Han Shuo left and went to look for Rose. The misty hot spring area had been forcibly occupied by the divine guards. Several divine guards with wet hair were standing guard at the entrance of the hot spring to prevent any male divine guards from entering. They were especially vigilant against people like Gilbert. "My lord." As soon as the divine guards saw Han Shuo, they hastily put on solemn expressions and respectfully saluted Han Shuo. "I'm looking for Rose," said Han Shuo in an indifferent tone after taking a glance at the divine guards. The divine guards weren't exactly beautiful, but they were tall and slender. Their skin was taut and powerful. Due to their long training, they didn't have any excess fat on their bodies. They looked heroic, wild, and charming. "Lady Rose is inside," said one of the divine guards with a sweet smile. Then, as though she had thought of something, she looked at Han Shuo with eyes filled with ambiguity. This divine guard was tall and slender. When she stood straight, her eyes were at the level of Han Shuo's mouth. Although she didn't have an outstanding appearance, her breasts were extraordinarily large and perky. After taking off her divine armor and changing into a soft robe, her heavy breasts looked as though they were about to burst out of her clothes. As though she sensed Han Shuo's gaze, this divine guard suddenly straightened her back. Her twin peaks violently swayed and vibrated in mesmerizing circles. She looked at Han Shuo with a seductive smile and said, "My lord, my name is Rosie." "So big." Han Shuo nodded and said, "Roxy, I'll remember your name." As divine guards, they might lose their lives in the next dangerous mission. There was no guarantee of their safety. It was for this reason that every one of these divine guards was bold and wild. Once they set their eyes on someone, they would not wait around like ordinary women but would take the initiative to attack. From Roxy's point of view, the unfathomably mysterious and terrifyingly powerful Han Shuo was as lofty as a lofty mountain. To her, such an outstanding man was an irresistible attraction. She didn't mind having sex with Han Shuo in the slightest. All she wanted was a moment of pleasure. Therefore, when she noticed that Han Shuo's gaze was lingering on her most prideful breasts, not only did she not feel embarrassed, she even took the initiative to stick out her breasts to attract more of Han Shuo's attention. She hoped that Han Shuo would take a liking to her and give her a good workout. When the divine guards saw that Han Shuo's gaze lingered on Roxy's breasts, they hated that their breasts weren't prominent enough. They had no choice but to expose the most alluring parts of their bodies to Han Shuo, hoping that Han Shuo would notice them. To these divine guards, Han Shuo was their god. A man like Han Shuo was a man that could only be found by chance. As long as Han Shuo beckoned, they would be willing to take off their clothes, take a bath, lie down on the bed, and await Han Shuo's favor. To them, who worshipped the strong, Han Shuo was poison. Chapter 797. What kind of woman had Han Shuo not seen before? Han Shuo only needed to stare at Rosie's watery eyes for a few seconds to know what Rosie was thinking. Having experienced so many women, Han Shuo no longer needed women to decorate his life, especially since Rosie was his subordinate. As the chief of divine guards, he had the duty to set a good example for her. Of course, he couldn't act recklessly. Han Shuo nodded indifferently and ignored Rosie's flirtatious eyes. He walked past her towards the hot spring area. Rosie's face turned somewhat gloomy when she saw that Han Shuo was leaving. She lowered her head to look at her voluptuous bosom and sighed in her mind. Am I not attractive enough? Why didn't the chief give me any hints? The other female divine guards were both dispirited and happy when they saw that Han Shuo had left. They were happy that Han Shuo did not show any special intentions towards Rosie. They were dispirited that the chief could even ignore Rosie's voluptuous figure. Did that mean that they had no chance at all? After all, we are not Lady Rose. Only Lady Rose's beauty and strength are worthy of the chief of divine guards, sighed a female divine guard sourly. In their minds, it was obvious that Rose had long been Han Shuo's woman since she followed Han Shuo blindly. When the female divine guards recalled Rose's extraordinary beauty and terrifying strength, they suddenly felt relieved. They started to sigh and sigh, lamenting their innate inadequacies. If I could spend a night with a man like the chief of divine guards, I would die without regrets, said a coquettish female divine guard as she licked her lips. Her face was filled with envy. Isn't Kibo trying to woo you? You are disdainful of him, and yet you are willing to humiliate yourself. What are you thinking in that head of yours? All you have to do is crook your finger and Kibo will crawl under your feet and lick your toes like a dog. It's not like you lack men, said one of the most unattractive female divine guards. She admired Kibo, but he ignored her. How can someone like Kibo be compared to the chief of divine guards? The coquettish female divine guard smirked and said, I would rather kneel and lick Lord Divine Guard Chief's toes than be fawned upon by a useless man. The other female divine guards nodded in agreement as soon as she said that. Han Shuo did not waste his demon generals to pay attention to the lustful thoughts these female divine guards were having about him. He calmly walked towards the hot spring area that was shrouded in mist. This natural hot spring covered an area of 1,000 meters and was divided into several sections. Each individual could have a small area to themselves. With Rose's strength, it was only natural that she had her own private area. Therefore, Han Shuo headed straight for Rose. Halfway through the journey, a few divine guards who were leisurely soaking in the hot spring suddenly noticed that a man was approaching them. They shrieked in panic. But when they realized that the man was Han Shuo, their shrieks grew even louder. However, no matter how much Han Shuo listened to them, he could not feel the slightest bit of fear in their shrieks. There was only excitement. Wherever Han Shuo walked past, the female divine guards who were soaking in the hot spring would feign shyness and cover their private parts. However, Han Shuo did not know whether it was because their private parts were too big or because they could not close their fingers, but when they covered their chest and abdomen with their palms, they would always see something beautiful peeking out from the gaps between their fingers. It would be the blush of their twin peaks, or the fragrant grass of their shame. Han Shuo suddenly felt that these female divine guards were like wolves looking at their prey. Han Shuo did not know whether they wanted him to pounce on them, or take the initiative to bite them. Han Shuo was startled. Han Shuo rubbed his temples, vexed. He looked straight ahead and walked towards Rose with a straight face. But one of his demon generals was quietly released by him, allowing him to have a panoramic view of the entire hot spring. Damn it, these female divine guards are really coquettish. Han Shuo thought to himself that there was no harm in taking a look. Besides, no one would be able to find out. Therefore, he did not hold back and used a demon general to imprint all the beautiful naked bodies of those female divine guards into his mind. Hypocrites! When Han Shuo finally arrived at the hot spring where Rose was, Rose, who was wearing a loose silk robe and wringing out her wet hair, snorted in displeasure. The female divine guards could not sense the demon general that Han Shuo had released. But Rose, who knew all of Han Shuo's tricks, could sense it. For some unknown reason, when Rose discovered the demon general lurking beside those coquettish female divine guards, she wanted nothing more than to grab the demon general and kill it. She also wanted to rush over and teach those shameless female divine guards a lesson. She knew that the demon general had transmitted every single detail of the hot spring to Han Shuo. Looking at Han Shuo walking towards her while taking advantage of her with the demon general, Rose was furious. Han Shuo immediately realized that Rose had discovered his vile behavior. He looked a little embarrassed. However, Han Shuo did not retract the demon general. He pretended to be oblivious and said to Rose, "I'm here to ask you about the fringe. What do you say? Do you have time? Let's talk. If you don't retract that strange life form, I won't tell you anything even if I die." Rose did not even look at Han Shuo. She was twisting her hair with all her might. Judging from the way she was gnashing her teeth, it was as though she was twisting not her hair but some unscrupulous peeping Tom. Han Shuo could not help but laugh. He had no choice but to retract the demon general and spread his hands to show that he was innocent. He asked again, "Are you satisfied now? Didn't you ask me the last time? Why are you asking me about the fringe again?" Rose immediately lessened her strength in twisting her hair. She suddenly remembered that twisting her hair so hard was not good for the quality of her hair. She hastily flicked her long hair and felt her heart ache. "Nothing. I'm just curious about the fringe and want to know more about it," replied Han Shuo with a smile. Han Shuo did not know that Andre intended to use Carmelita to form a marriage alliance with the Han family. However, he overheard the conversation between Ralph and Wallace. As he had been keeping an eye on Ralph, fearing that he might be up to no good, Han Shuo had placed his most powerful demon general beside Ralph. That demon general did not leave with them when they left the center of Soaring Cloud Mountain Range. Wallace's words echoed in Han Shuo's mind without missing a single word. It was also at that moment that Han Shuo suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis. Just as Wallace had said, no matter what, Ralph was a member of the House of Saint. To be precise, he was Wallace's man. And no matter how powerful Han Shuo was, he was the patriarch of the Han family. At present, it seemed that the Han family and the House of Saint would not have any conflicts because the Han family's existence was far from threatening the House of Saint's position in the City of Shadows. But what about in the future? Everyone could see the astonishing potential of the Han family. The Fifth Corps' performance in the battle was even more eye-catching, especially Balins, Sanguiner, and Gilbert. It was obvious that they were geniuses who would become high gods within a short period of time. In addition to the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy's growing influence in the City of Shadows and even the entire Darkness Dominion, it was only a matter of time before the Han family grew to a level that would give the House of Saint a headache. When that time came, Han Shuo's relationship with Wallace and Andre would not be as harmonious as it was now. It might even lead to conflict. The House of Lavers was a good example. As the patriarch of the Han family, Han Shuo had to be vigilant in times of peace. Now that he was no longer alone, he couldn't just pull himself away from danger. He had no choice but to plan ahead for the sake of the Han family, so that the Han family would not fall into a disadvantageous position one day. And the Fringe was a place that gave Han Shuo hope. The Fringe is filled with experts. It does not belong to any of the 12 dominions of Elysium. There are no overgods there. As long as you have sufficient strength, you can do whatever you want in the Fringe. No one can restrain you. The Fringe is a paradise for felons. The most ferocious thugs from the 12 dominions love the Fringe because there are no forces there that can control them. Rose did not understand why Han Shuo was so concerned about the Fringe, but she continued to describe the situation in detail to Han Shuo. Doesn't belong to any of the 12 dominions. Doesn't belong to any of the 12 dominions. Han Shuo mumbled to himself. He suddenly raised his head and bunched his brows. Is there really no overgod to govern such a place? The fringe is located at the border between the dominion of space and the dominion of destiny. Neither the overgods of space nor the overgods of destiny care much about the conflicts on Elysium. They don't forbid any gods from entering their territories, much less the central region of the fringe. After taking a short pause, Rose continued, the fringe is located at the border of the space dominion and the destiny dominion. Naturally, the other 10 overgods would not risk offending 2 neutral overgods by intervening in the fringe, especially when the goddess of destiny is an agent of the creator deities. Every overgod is a shrewd and cunning individual. Those 2 overgods have always been neutral. Who would dare to offend them? After listening to Rose's analysis, Han Shuo inwardly nodded and smilingly said, Great place, truly a great place. What's so great about it? Rose rolled her eyes and said, It's the most chaotic place on Elysium. God hunters roam openly in Elysium. Weaker gods might be killed by the god hunters before they can even enter the fringe. Rose had suffered greatly in the fringe and did not have the slightest favorable impression of the place. If it weren't for Han Shuo insisting on going, Rose wouldn't have set foot in the fringe for another 1,000 or even 10,000 years. The fringe was truly a taboo to her. The more Rose feared the fringe, the more excited Han Shuo became. He had never been one to shy away from challenges, especially after hearing Rose repeatedly emphasize the uniqueness of the fringe. Han Shuo was filled with great interest. Han Shuo, who was born with the desire to conquer, had made the fringe his goal. Not only did Han Shuo want to go there, but he also wanted to conquer the fringe and become the overlord of the fringe. Chapter 798. After a round of detailed discussion, Han Shuo obtained the information he wanted from Rose. He made the fringe his main target in the future. After leaving the hot spring area, the female divine guards started showing off in front of Han Shuo again, hoping that Han Shuo would do something to them. As Han Shuo was worried about the future of the Han family and his future relationship with the House of Saint, he did not send out his demon generals to spy on the female divine guards again. Instead, he calmly left the fringe. The female divine guards were very disappointed. After Han Shuo left, they sighed in self-pity. Barnard distributed the divine essences to the divine guards according to their performance in the battle. Under Ballins's indifferent gaze, no one objected to the distribution of the divine essences. Those who received divine essences were, of course, overjoyed. Those who did not receive divine essences were slightly disappointed, but not too dissatisfied. Ballins and Sanguiner cultivated in demonic arts and did not need divine essences to increase their strength. Gilbert, however, was a little different. As he possessed darkness divine energy in his body, he needed divine essences. As one of the main contributors to the battle, he received the largest piece of darkness divine essences. With the competition between the teams of divine guards over, the 5th Corps divine guards had nothing to do for the time being. They could relax and have some fun. However, Ballins did not give the divine guards too much time to relax. The next day, he gathered the divine guards once more and discussed their experiences in the duels. He wanted to learn from their mistakes and learn from their mistakes. In the eyes of the patriarchs and divine guard chiefs, the cooperation between the 5th Corps had reached the acme of perfection. However, as the leader of the battle, Ballins felt that the performance of the divine guards was far from what he expected. During the actual battle, their cooperation was far from perfect. Ballins wanted to use all the time he had to bring out the potential of the divine guards and change their way of thinking so that they would see themselves as part of the Han family. Therefore, from the second day onwards, Ballins started to instill new ideas into the divine guards' minds. He told them that the reason they were able to defeat the 2nd Corps was all thanks to the 8 Desolation and Torment formation. In other words, Han Shuo, who deployed the formation, was the reason they won the battle. Ballins deeply imprinted Han Shuo's image in the minds of the divine guards. He made them understand that everything they had was bestowed upon them by Han Shuo. Under such deliberate influence, The Divine Guards would gradually acknowledge Balan's views and change their views. Han Shua saw all of this and nodded in his mind. With a great helper like Balan's, Han Shua believed that there wouldn't be any problems. In the future, Han Shua would have to travel to the Fringe. Whether it was the Fringe or the City of Shadows, Han Shua would only be able to gain a stable foothold in both the Fringe and the City of Shadows. If the Han family's Celestial Pearl Pharmacy wished to expand in the Darkness Dominion, they would need Divine Guards to protect them. It was for this reason that Han Shua had to increase the strength of the Han family at all costs. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The patriarchs of the major family clans and the 7 Divine Guard chiefs once again gathered at the center of soaring Cloud Mountain Range. When the patriarchs and experts of the major family clans saw Han Shua, they were even more cordial than before. The crowd greeted Han Shua as soon as he appeared. For a moment, Han Shua was not used to it. In the past, the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans, Kinsen, Buller, and Kisa, would only nod at Han Shua when they saw him. They had never considered Han Shua to be their equal. In their minds, the Han family, which had just risen to power, was relying on the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. A family clan without military strength was far from being comparable to an established family clan like theirs. Although Han Shua had taken over the 5th Corps from Wallace, in their eyes, the 5th Corps that did not even have 10 companies was nothing but an undeserved reputation and was nothing to be proud of. It was only after the 5th Corps displayed astonishing combat strength 3 days ago that the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans started to take the Han family seriously. They started to view Han Shua as someone who could stand on equal footing with them. No matter where one is, one can only be respected by others if one possesses sufficient strength, thought Han Shua to himself after noticing the change in attitude of the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans towards him. Ralph of the 2nd Bureau had a dark expression on his face, a stark contrast to the cheers and laughter in the room. A pair of icy, resentful eyes landed on Han Shua without the slightest concealment. Standing alone in a remote corner, Ralph was like a venomous snake lurking in the shadows, flicking its tongue. His target was obviously Han Shua. Han Shua greeted the patriarchs and Divine Guard chiefs of the 3 major family clans without the slightest trace of unfamiliarity. It was as though he had been interacting with them for a long time. Han Shua wore a warm and reserved smile on his face. He greeted everyone in a friendly manner, discussed the taste of fine wine, and discussed the management of Divine Guards. The patriarchs and Divine Guard chiefs who had been feigning civility with Han Shua were inwardly impressed by Han Shua's tact. His outstanding ability to socialize was something that could not be cultivated without decades or centuries of immersion. The fact that Han Shua was able to handle everything with ease and composure made them look at Han Shua in a whole new light. Although Ralph possessed astonishing strength, had a group of murderous fiends from the 2nd Corps under his command, and had Wallace backing him up, the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans secretly admired Han Shua. Although the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans loathed Han Shua, they did not consider him to be a worthy opponent because he did not know how to conduct himself. A boorish fellow, no matter how powerful he might be, was still a boorish fellow. A boorish fellow who did not understand the ways of the world and did not know how to endure patiently would not be able to do much in the grand stage that was the City of Shadows. Han Shua was different. From the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans, Han Shua, who had developed the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy into the Han family in such a short period of time, gained control of the 5th Corps, and trained the Divine Guards of the 5th Corps, was a terrifying existence, especially when Han Shua blended in among them without the slightest hesitation and gained a favorable impression from them as though he was taking a stroll in his own backyard. They became more vigilant against Han Shua. The wolf is coming. That was the thought in the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans. Although the City of Shadows had a complicated power structure, the most powerful forces were still the few major family clans. The City of Shadows was only so large and most of the resources were in the hands of these few major family clans. The rise of the Han family would inevitably cause conflict with them. If the Han family wished to obtain more territory, they would have to seize it from their hands. Under such circumstances, the patriarchs of the major family clans who had been smiling and amiably at Han Shuo had taken Han Shuo as a potential rival. The patriarchs of the major family clans finally took Han Shuo seriously as an equal opponent. There was no longer the slightest trace of contempt in their eyes. The rules of the duel are very simple. Draw lots. Of course, just like in previous tournaments, challenges can be issued before the lots are drawn. As long as the challenged is willing to accept the challenge, the two can skip the first round of drawing lots and fight directly. Wallace looked around with his ferocious eyes and announced in a low voice. The reason why there was a challenge rule was so that the loser could take revenge. Although the City of Shadows forbade private duels, it did not forbid such challenges. As long as both parties agreed to it, and with a witness, the challenge could proceed. As soon as Wallace finished those words, Ralph, who had been as silent as an ice-cold rock, suddenly walked out from his corner. He first looked at Han Shuo coldly before he said to Wallace, "I challenge the Chief of 5th Corps, Brian." Upon finishing those words, Ralph looked at Han Shuo in a cold and provocative smile and said, "Lord Brian, do you dare to accept the challenge?" Han Shuo had long anticipated that Ralph would make such a move. Ralph was a vengeful person. After suffering a loss in the team duel, he would surely not let go of this opportunity. Otherwise, Han Shuo's influence in the City of Shadows would surely decline. Why not? Han Shuo put on a faint smile, bowed at Wallace and said, "I accept his challenge." "Good. The two of you will wait. The other 5 will draw lots. Those who draw a blank will wait for the next round." Wallace nodded and looked at Ralph with pity in his eyes. How could Ralph possibly defeat someone who could injure Hoffs of Hushvale City? Ralph, of course, had no idea what was going through Wallace's mind. As soon as Han Shuo accepted the challenge, Ralph put on a cold smile and said, "Very well, let's see if you, the Chief of 5th Corps, have the strength to take that position." Han Shuo shrugged. He was much calmer than Ralph and ignored him. He turned to Erebus and Aobashi beside him and teased, "You two, don't draw the same lot. If my opponent is her, I will surrender." Erebus put on a mischievous smile. He did not feel that it was inappropriate to admit defeat to Aobashi at all. "Erebus, this is how you make me uncomfortable. Who told you to give in to me? Do what I tell you to do? Don't you have any backbone?" Aobashi did not appreciate Erebus' kindness at all. She cursed at Erebus. Erebus forced a smile and said, "I like it." Han Shuo was speechless. He thought, it's no wonder Aobashi doesn't like Erebus. A strong woman like Aobashi needs a stronger man to conquer her. To Aobashi, a man like Erebus who follows her every order is tasteless. Therefore, even though Aobashi knows that Erebus is obedient to her, she did not show any disrespect. "If you were like Brian, I might have become your follower," said Aobashi angrily as she glared at Erebus. Upon hearing those words, Erebus was astounded. He raised his head and looked at Han Shuo. Han Shuo was also at a loss. He raised his hand and hastily said, "Don't overthink things. Aobashi and I are clean." Aobashi giggled and reprimanded Erebus. "What are you thinking? I'm just saying that you should have some backbone. Don't just do whatever I tell you to do. I don't like men who are obedient to me." Erebus heaved a sigh of relief after hearing Aobashi's words. He forced a smile and muttered to himself, "What's wrong with being nice to you? Women are really—" Han Shuo looked at Aobashi. He suddenly felt that the way Aobashi was looking at him was a little strange. His heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, "She can't be interested in me, can she?" Han Shuo was shocked when he thought of that. He looked at Aobashi with a strange gaze. Chapter 799. Aobashi was a famous beauty in the City of Shadows and possessed outstanding strength. On top of that, she was the leader of the 7 Divine Guard Chiefs. Other than men of the same rank like Erebus, no one would dare to even think about courting her. Aobashi was dressed in green clothes, her features were refined and elegant, and her body was curvaceous and graceful. No matter how one looked at her, Aobashi was a beauty. But as she was of noble status and possessed incomparably valiant strength, not many men dared to look at her with eyes full of charm. This is a woman that Erebus admires, Han Shuo reminded himself. Then, following Aobashi's words, he put on a faint smile and said, I have too many women by my side. I don't have that many foolish women sticking themselves to me. Lord Aobashi is not my type. Don't worry, Erebus. After hearing Han Shuo's words, Aobashi shot a glance at him with her bright eyes and giggled softly. She said, What are you afraid of? What do you need to prove? Do you really think that Erebus believes in us? Han Shuo put on a mischievous smile and said, Aren't you afraid that Erebus will be jealous? Don't worry. Even if she wants to choose, she won't humiliate herself. I believe in that. Haha, what am I afraid of? After hearing Han Shuo's explanation, Erebus recalled that there were many beautiful women in the Han family. Who knows? Aobashi put on a mischievous smile, as though she was determined to strike a blow at Erebus. Erebus was speechless and could only force a smile. While Han Shuo and his two divine guard chiefs were chatting and laughing, Camilla, Rugersi, and Batuk had finished drawing their lots. Wallace swept his gaze around and saw Han Shuo and his two divine guard chiefs laughing and chatting. He immediately said in a deep voice, Aobashi, Erebus, it's your turn. Seeing that Han Shuo was getting along well with his two divine guard chiefs, not only did Wallace not feel that the atmosphere was harmonious, he even felt a little worried. Unknowingly, Han Shuo had influenced many of the people around him. Carmelita, Andre, Erebus, Aobashi, and other core members of the House of Saint seemed to be on intimate terms with Han Shuo. This was not a good sign for Wallace. Coming. Aobashi smiled and rolled her eyes at Han Shuo. Then, she went to draw lots with Erebus. Wallace, who was carefully observing Han Shuo's trio, couldn't help but frown deeply. Suddenly, he felt that Ralph was the only one among his loyal subordinates who had never betrayed him. With that thought in mind, Wallace couldn't help but look at Ralph in the distance. For some reason, Wallace felt vaguely uncomfortable when he thought that Ralph might be defeated soon. The results soon came out. Erebus and Camilla, Chief of the Fourth Corps, Batuk and Rugersi, and Aobashi drew a blank. Aobashi, who was holding a blank lot in her hand, said cheerfully, My luck is not bad. I can save some energy. To her, other than Ralph, no one else could pose any threat to her. Aobashi, who was unaware of Han Shuo's true strength, had included Han Shuo in her calculations. From her point of view, although Han Shuo possessed extraordinary strength, he might not necessarily be a match for Ralph. Aobashi, who had been Ralph's rival for many years, knew very well how formidable Ralph could be. Therefore, she had repeatedly reminded Han Shuo to be careful of Ralph and hoped that Han Shuo would not let his guard down. Aobashi, who had never fought against Han Shuo, had only learned from some sources that Han Shuo had fought against Portlam back in the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. Portlam, who had just entered High God Realm, was of no threat to Aobashi. Therefore, based on her previous experience, Han Shuo's strength was at most that of a mid-stage High God. Aobashi did not believe that an expert of this realm could defeat her. All right then, we won't choose another battlefield. Let's do it at the same place where the Divine Guards fought, said Wallace. He turned to Han Shuo and Ralph and said, If there are no questions, the two of you may go. Andre will go with you. Upon finishing those words, Wallace raised his voice and let out a shrill whistle. Upon hearing Wallace's shout, Andre, who was not present at the scene, immediately ordered the Divine Guards of the House of Saint to nod at Wallace from a distance. He even gestured to Wallace to indicate that there were no problems. Han Shuo did not say a word. He walked straight towards Andre. Ralph glared at Han Shuo's back and followed after Han Shuo. It would take several days for the Divine Guards to travel from this area to the arena. Naturally, Han Shuo and Ralph, who possessed high god strengths, wouldn't need that much time to travel at top speed. Under Andre's lead, it only took them a few hours to arrive at the arena. To these high gods who had cultivated for several years, a few hours was nothing. Andre paid no attention to Ralph throughout the journey. He only chatted and laughed with Han Shuo. From Andre's point of view, The outcome of the battle had been decided from the very beginning. Andre, who disliked Ralph, was already being very gentlemanly by not making a few sarcastic remarks. There were energy towers in the arena that formed a powerful defensive boundary. Those fighting in the arena would not have to worry about the shockwaves from the battle. Most importantly, Wallace and the patriarchs of the three major family clans could clearly see the situation on the other side of the arena through the sand table and truly understand the strengths of the Divine Guard chiefs. Andre led Han Shuo and Ralph to the arena and gestured for them to enter. After Han Shuo entered the arena, Andre reminded Han Shuo, "Minor injuries are not a problem, but do not kill or seriously injure them. My elder brother does not wish for the Divine Guard chiefs to be unable to continue serving the City of Shadows." "Lord Andre, what do you mean by this?" Ralph, who was about to enter the arena, put on a cold face and shouted in a deep voice. Andre shot a glance at Ralph, smiled, shook his head, and said nothing. In the end, he said to Han Shuo, "Have mercy." Upon finishing those words, Ralph stepped aside and loudly instructed his divine guards, "The battlefield has been cleared. Disperse. No one is to enter." Ralph had a belly full of resentment, but he did not know who to vent it on. After Andre finished giving his orders, Ralph let out a cold groan and said to Han Shuo in a low voice, "Lord Brian, I will not show any mercy." Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. He picked his ears and said in a mocking tone, "Andre just asked me to show mercy. Are you deaf? Did you not hear him? Hee, don't show mercy. If you do, I fear that I will not be able to control myself and kill you. Let's fight." When Ralph realized that he was no match for Han Shuo in a war of words, he wasted no more time and charged into the arena. As soon as Han Shuo and Han Shuo entered the arena, Wallace, the patriarchs of the three major family clans, and a few other Divine Guard chiefs who did not participate in the battle turned their attention to the sand table at the center. Wallace seemed to have done something, but the two black dots on the sand table were suddenly enlarged. The figures of Han Shuo and Ralph gradually became clearer. "It will be very interesting if Ralph loses this battle," remarked Camilla in a low voice. "I wonder if Brian can win. Haha, he is always so unbelievable." Gia, who was standing beside Camilla, put on an expectant smile. Casper, the patriarch of the House of Kinson, looked at his daughter Gia in astonishment. He had been rather puzzled when he learned that Gia had gone to the Fifth Corps 2 days ago. Casper, who was adept at reading people's expressions, felt that his daughter seemed to be treating Han Shuo differently. Now that he heard Gia's words, a thought suddenly popped into his mind. "Gia, are you interested in that youngster?" Casper put on a stern face and asked in a low voice. As a father, Casper did not need to hide anything from Gia. He asked her anything. Gia was obviously startled. She raised her head and looked at Casper. She immediately replied in a flustered manner, "Of course not. Father, don't let your imagination run wild." As expected, how could Casper not understand his daughter's thoughts? His daughter, who had always remained calm and unwavering even in the face of great pressure, seemed rather flustered this time around. There must be something fishy going on. "That youngster is said to be a womanizer. You must be careful," Casper softly warned his daughter. Then, he continued in a gentle voice, "But if you are willing and have made up your mind, I will not stop you." Gia was stunned. She stared at Casper in disbelief. This father of hers was not at all open-minded. Most of the young men who had admired her over the years had been chased away by him. Why was he suddenly not objecting this time? Moreover, he clearly knew that youngster was a womanizer. Why did he say that he would not stop him? Just as Gia was pondering with doubts, Camilla suddenly exclaimed, "Why can't I see anything?" Gia was startled again. She was worried for Han Shuo for no reason. At this moment, she could not be bothered to let her imagination run wild. She hastily looked at the scene in the sand table. Everything in the sand table was the same as before. There was a cloud of white mist drifting over from an unknown place. It happened to block the area where Han Shuo and Ralph were fighting. The group of people, who had been filled with anticipation, scratched their ears and cheeks in anxiety. They had no idea what was happening inside. Looking at the sand table, they could see dust and debris flying in the mist from time to time. It was obvious that an earth-shattering battle was taking place inside. Castellan, why did the mist suddenly appear? Casper hastily asked. Wallace was also baffled. He took out a magic mirror and asked Andre, "What's going on? Didn't you clean up that area? Why did there suddenly appear a cloud of mist at such a crucial moment? Where did it come from?" Andre smiled bitterly in the magic mirror and said, "Everything inside has been cleaned up. There's no way such an accident would happen. This situation must be man-made." Man-made? Wallace frowned. In all the previous battles, Ralph had always been attacking ferociously. He had never had the time to care about the situation around him. If it really was done by someone, then the culprit had to be Han Shua. Of this, Wallace was 100% sure. Why? Why couldn't anyone see how he attacked? Wallace frowned deeply. Chapter 800. Of course, Han Shua had his reasons for doing so. To defeat Ralph, his main strength was demonic arts. He would have to use his 17 flying swords. However, if Han Shua were to use his trump card in front of so many people, the patriarchs of the other 3 major family clans and the Divine Guard chiefs in the City of Shadows would be able to immediately connect the dots to what happened in Hushvale City. Those people might not be able to keep their mouths shut. As long as someone were to spread the news, Hoffs of Hushvale City would surely come after Han Shua and the Han family at all costs. Obviously, this was not what Han Shua wanted to see. He took out a banner of hallucination. Layers of mist spread out and formed a large cloud that blocked everyone's vision. Wallace and the others couldn't see what was going on inside the cloud. At the center of the banner of hallucination, Ralph was firmly suppressed by Han Shua. There was no room for him to retaliate. It was only at this moment that Ralph realized how wrong he had been. Before entering the fighting area, he had fantasized about defeating Han Shua here and now. But now that the fight had begun, before Ralph could even see the situation clearly, he was entangled by beams of dazzling light. Under the light and shadows of the banner of hallucination, Ralph did not even know that the beams of dazzling light were the 17 flying swords released by Han Shua. Ralph's domain of divinity was also firmly suppressed. All of his tricks seemed so futile in the face of such an unparalleled force. In the Avicii Hell, Ralph felt as though he was a small boat in a raging torrent that could be swallowed at any moment. Despicable. Ralph couldn't help but curse in his mind when he recalled Han Shua's performance in the City of Shadows and saw the terrifying strength that Han Shua had displayed. An expert who could firmly suppress him without giving him the slightest chance to retaliate had resorted to a sneak attack right from the start. How despicable. It was like a burly man beating up a child and kicking the child from behind. That was how Ralph felt. Beams of dazzling light flashed in front of him like an invisible net. A domineering energy that he had never felt before swarmed towards Ralph from all directions. Strong corrosive toxins and cold air flowed towards him, wearing down the divine energy in his body. His resistance became weaker and weaker. Ralph felt extremely aggrieved. He could not see Han Shua's face in the Avicii Hell. He was trapped by the space formed by the 17 flying swords. There was no way he could break out of this confinement. All he could do was exhaust the divine power in his body to resist. And the ending seemed to have been decided from the beginning. Ralph knew that he had lost, and it was a crushing defeat. Inside the sand table at the center of the flying Cloud Mountain range, Wallace and the others no longer lowered their heads to look at the sand table. Instead, they were whispering to each other and discussing the real situation in the arena. In the most crucial region of the sand table, there was a cloud of mist that did not show any signs of dissipating. At this point, anyone could tell that the cloud of mist was man-made. It was impossible for such a phenomenon to occur in the middle of a battle between 2 high gods. The crowd looked at each other. Aobashi and Erebus exchanged glances. They were rather worried. City Lord, what is Ralph trying to do? He must have deliberately created a cloud of mist to do something despicable to Brian, said Rugersi furiously. Wallace took a glance at Rugercy and said indifferently, "Who says that it must be Ralph's doing? If it's not him, who else could it be? Brian?" Rugercy shook his head and said, "Given Ralph's strength, only someone with slightly greater strength would have the leisure to create such a cloud of mist. Who else could it be if not him?" Although there were so many people in the arena, other than Wallace, the others shared the same thought as Rugercy. They assumed that the cloud of mist that obscured their vision came from Ralph. Aobashi and Erebus bunched their brows. The two of them were the closest to Han Shuo, and they did not want to see anything happen to Han Shuo. After hesitating for a moment, Aobashi said, "The battle between Divine Guard chiefs is just a competition. It's not a fight to the death. Could it be that Ralph is doing this because he hates Brian for his victory 3 days ago?" "Let's keep watching," said Wallace coldly. He suddenly felt rather irritated. The crowd was stunned. They could hear the displeasure in Wallace's tone. After staring blankly for a moment, they did not say anything else. They were all thinking about what was going on. The rules of the competition between Divine Guard chiefs were set by Wallace himself. Ralph, the chief of the Second Corps, had to obey all of Wallace's orders. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any problems with the competition. Perhaps we are worrying too much, the crowd thought to themselves. While they were inwardly puzzled, Han Shuo knew that Ralph's sharpness had been ground to dust. Sneering in his heart, Han Shuo suddenly plunged into the Avicenaraka hell and launched a sudden assault when Ralph's divine energy was at its weakest. With the most ferocious attack, Han Shuo destroyed Ralph's remaining resistance. The 17 flying swords were suddenly withdrawn. Han Shuo, who had continuously blasted through layers of defensive boundaries, injected a few streams of demonic energy into Ralph's chest, rendering Ralph powerless to retaliate. With one thought, the banner of hallucination was withdrawn. The demon's lair edge flew out from Han Shuo's arm and pointed at Ralph's throat. "The mist is gone," cried Camilla in surprise. The crowd's gazes were immediately gathered on the sand table. The noisy murmurs suddenly vanished. The surroundings abruptly quietened down. The patriarchs and Divine Guard chiefs of the major family clans were dumbstruck. They stared at the scene on the sand table in astonishment. Their faces were filled with disbelief. In the sand table, Ralph's face was ghastly pale. He was lying limply on the ground, as though he had collapsed from exhaustion. His eyes were wide open as he stared at his chest in fear. A pitch-black, ice-cold longsword that was as sharp as an awl was pressed against Ralph's throat. Even though they were looking at it through the sand table, they had no doubt that Ralph would die on the spot if the oddly shaped longsword were to be pushed forward. In their eyes, Han Shuo was still wearing a faint smile on his face. However, at this moment, his usual gentle smile seemed somewhat cold. The patriarchs of the major family clans couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. They suddenly felt that Han Shuo, who had been talking and laughing with them, was a demon wearing a mask. Ralph is lost. Wallace was expressionless. He shot a glance at Rugercy and said, "The one who created the mist must be the one with the upper hand. Now, you should know where the mist came from, right?" Under Wallace's gaze, Rugercy put on an embarrassed face. He forced a smile and said, "I really did not expect that Brian would be this terrifying. He could even defeat Ralph." "Ralph has suffered a crushing defeat. He seems to be exhausted and unable to retaliate. On the other hand, Brian looks exactly the same as when he first entered the battlefield. He doesn't seem to have used any energy at all." Aobashi put on a solemn face and said, "This is a complete victory. Even when I fought Ralph, I never had such an easy victory. It seems that I will have to hand over my position as the chief of Divine Guard chiefs to someone else." Upon hearing those words, the crowd once again focused their attention and realized that Aobashi was telling the truth. One side was completely unscathed while the other side was utterly defeated. It was a battle with a huge disparity in strength. After a moment of silence, the crowd burst into an uproar. They were whispering to each other with faces filled with amazement. They were constantly crying out in surprise and marveling at the strength Han Shuo had displayed. The patriarch of the House of Kinsen, Casper, couldn't help but look at his daughter Jia, who was brimming with joy. He suddenly felt that it would be a great deal to trade his daughter's happiness for such a son-in-law. With that thought in mind, Caspar secretly decided that he would have a good discussion with his wife when he returned to the house of Kinson. He wanted her to persuade his daughter to act as soon as possible. Caspar had sensed Han Shua's enormous power. Chapter 801. Han Shua's victory had exceeded everyone's expectations. When he returned to the center of the arena, he was greeted by gazes of awe and reverence. Other than Wallace, who had long known the outcome, the patriarchs of the 3 major family clans, the 5 Divine Guard chiefs, and the core members of various major family clans had their gazes fixed on Han Shua. Han Shua was very satisfied with their gazes. He believed that it wouldn't be long before the news of him defeating Ralph and claiming first place in the competition spread throughout the City of Shadows. At that time, he would no longer have to worry about the lack of people joining the Han family and desperately squeezing their way into the 5th Corps. Brian, did you really defeat Ralph? Even now, Carmelita still found it hard to believe that Ralph, the chief of the 5th Corps who had performed outstandingly in the City of Shadows, had suffered a crushing defeat. His 2nd Corps, which he was so proud of, had been utterly crushed by Han Shua, who had just made a name for himself. This was a major change that had not happened in the City of Shadows for many years. From today onwards, Ralph had lost all the capital to be arrogant. The City of Shadows was no longer a place where he, Ralph, could throw his weight around. He had lost everything in the hands of Han Shua. Han Shua put on a faint smile, blinked his eyes, pointed at the sand table in front of him, and said, "Didn't you all see everything?" Carmelita was stunned. Soon after, she became somewhat angry and said, "What? You didn't see anything at all? Why did you have to create a cloud of mist to conceal the entire battle scene?" "The process isn't important, the outcome is," replied Han Shua with a wicked smile on his face. "In short, I've won this battle. That's enough." "That's right. The process isn't important, the outcome is." Everyone here saw Brian pressing his sword against Ralph's throat. "We are all witnesses. Brian has won and Ralph has been utterly defeated. It's that simple." Caspar concluded and looked at City Lord Wallace smilingly. For a long time, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps under the control of the House of Saint had been far superior to the 3 major family clans in terms of both team combat and individual strength of their chiefs. The House of Saint had always firmly occupied the top 3 positions in the Divine Guard chiefs and the top 3 positions in the teams. However, from today onwards, the situation would be different. Wallace nodded indifferently and said in a deep voice, "All right, Brian has won this fight. Is there anyone who has any objection? Does anyone have any objections?" The truth was right in front of them. As long as one wasn't blind, they could see it. Caspar and the other 2 patriarchs exchanged a meaningful glance. Although they were enemies, the 3 patriarchs had a tacit understanding at this moment. Only they themselves knew what they were thinking. Before the departure of the House of Lavers, there were 5 major family clans in the City of Shadows. Although there were 5 major family clans, everyone knew that the House of Saint stood above all the other major family clans. The other 4 major family clans had always been restrained by the House of Saint. The House of Saint was like a colossus that held the City of Shadows firmly in its palm, not allowing anyone to encroach on its authority. Did the other families really not have any thoughts? The answer was obviously no. Be it the House of Kinson, House of Kisa, House of Buller, or even those lesser family clans, all coveted the position of Lord of the City of Shadows. There were only so many territories and resources in the City of Shadows. They had long been carved up by family clans of all sizes. For a new family clan to rise to prominence, they would need to own territories and all kinds of resources. In other words, the new family clan could only grow if other family clans were willing to give up their own resources. The rise of a major family clan was often accompanied by the fall of another. This was an unchanging fact. The rise of the Han family in the City of Shadows was an ironclad fact. If not for the expulsion of the House of Lavers, How could the Han family have risen so quickly? It was all because they occupied the territory of the Lavers family and obtained the enormous manor of the Lavers family. That was how they rose to the top of the City of Shadows. When the House of Saint first rose to power, it was just a small family clan in the City of Shadows, just like the House of Kinson, the House of Buller, and the House of Kisa. The reason why the House of Saint had what it had today was that the original owner of the City of Shadows, the House of Tianluo, suffered disastrous losses in a divine war against the dominions of light and life. The House of Saint had joined forces with the House of Kinson, House of Buller, and House of Kisa to destroy and replace the House of Saint. If the House of Saint were to decline one day, the current House of Kinson, House of Buller, and House of Kisa would very likely replace them and become the new rulers of the City of Shadows. They would possess everything the House of Saint had, or even more. How many people could resist such a temptation? Previously, the House of Kinson, Buller, and House of Kisa did not dare to resist because the House of Saint had suppressed them in every aspect. On top of that, there was Wallace's terrifying strength. But today, after Han Shuo effortlessly defeated Ralph with an overwhelming advantage, the House of Saint, a colossus that had towered over the City of Shadows for a long time, seemed to be slightly shaken. Just a slight shake, but it was enough. The patriarchs of the three major family clans exchanged glances. Although they did not say a word, they understood each other's thoughts. Wallace was just too powerful. If they really wanted to compete with the House of Saint, they would need someone who could defeat him. The patriarchs of the three major families were fully aware of this fact. They knew that their strengths were almost on par with Ralph's. They were all mid-stage high gods. The three of them absolutely believed that even if they could defeat Ralph, it wouldn't be an easy fight. Could this Brian defeat Wallace? The three patriarchs couldn't help but have the same question in their minds. With that thought in mind, they once again raised their heads and focused their gazes on Han Shuo. Let's wait and see. If he can defeat Aobashi with ease, it is almost certain that he has the strength to contend against Wallace, the three astute patriarchs thought. Next match, Erebus and Camilla. Wallace's voice sounded again. I'm going. Erebus, who was chatting and laughing with Han Shuo, calmly left when he heard Wallace call his name. Based on Han Shuo's understanding of Erebus, he believed that this match would not be too difficult for Erebus. The result was just as Han Shuo had expected. After spending half a day, Erebus defeated Camilla. Next up was the battle between Batuk and Rugersi. This battle was somewhat unexpected. Batuk, who was ranked last, had used all his strength in this battle. He had defeated Rugersi, who had previously defeated him. The ranking of Divine Guard chiefs had changed slightly. The victors would continue to fight for higher rankings while the losers would fight for the remaining rankings. The victors, Han Shuo, Erebus, Batuk, and Aobashi, who had drawn a blank lot, had to draw lots again. Batuk, if your opponent is Brian, just give up, the patriarch of the House of Buller, Laurel, instructed Batuk in a low voice before the lot was officially drawn. Batuk put on a bitter smile and said, Lord Patriarch, do you have so little confidence in me? Laurel laughed mischievously and said, Batuk, are you that confident? Batuk was a member of the House of Kisa. As the patriarch of the House of Kisa, Laurel knew Batuk's strength like the back of his hand. He did not believe that Batuk could defeat Han Shuo. No, not at all. Batuk shook his head and continued, but I have not seen Brian in action. Even if I am going to lose, I need to know his true strength, right? Laurel stared blankly for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he smilingly nodded and said, That's right. It's a match anyway. Let's fight. The results of the lot drawing were soon out. Laurel was right. Erebus versus Aobashi and Batuk versus Han Shuo. I give up. Without waiting for Wallace to say anything, Erebus immediately declared his position without the slightest bit of embarrassment. Under the astonished gazes of the crowd, Erebus shrugged and said, Aobashi and I have fought too many times in private. I am no match for her. This is a fact. Let's not waste our time. The crowd couldn't help but smile after hearing Erebus's words. They all knew that Erebus had been pursuing Aobashi. Even if Erebus's strength was no match for Aobashi, his straightforward attitude still made people think otherwise. They couldn't help but look at Erebus and Aobashi with dubious gazes. Who told you to give up? Why don't you fight? Aobashi frowned. She didn't expect Erebus to give up so easily. He had no backbone at all. I can't beat you, so I won't waste your energy and everyone's time. Erebus chuckled. Forget it. Since Erebus has given up, so be it. Wallace frowned. He felt that his two subordinates were a mess. He didn't know whether to call them good friends or just fooling around. Since Erebus and Aobashi had given up, Han Shua and Batuk entered the fighting area again. There was no suspense in this fight. The mist that had disappeared mysteriously reappeared and completely blocked the scene of the fight. Those who wanted to see Han Shua's strength gnashed their teeth in anger. When the mist finally dispersed, the scene of the arena once again entered the eyes of the crowd. Batuk, who was exhausted, was being pointed at by Han Shua with a sword. It was almost the same as the battle between Han Shua and Ralph. However, this battle was much shorter. Batuk was not as weak as Ralph, who did not even have the strength to walk. Han Shua pulled Batuk to his feet. Master Batuk, please forgive me. Han Shua knew that the people on the other side of the sand table had seen the fight clearly. He pulled Batuk to his feet and apologized sincerely. This is a fight. You don't have to be so polite. Batuk had lost anyway. He couldn't put on a smile like Han Shua. He nodded at Han Shua indifferently and left the fighting area with a dark face. Since his next fight was against Aobashi, Han Shua didn't leave the fighting area. He continued to apologize sincerely to Batuk's lonely back. How was it? Laurel asked hastily as soon as Batuk returned. It was as if I was pulled into an independent space. I didn't see Brian fight even once. By the time he appeared, I had already lost the fight. It was exactly the same as what you saw through the sand table. Batuk looked aggrieved. He couldn't accept the result. It wasn't shameful to lose. What was shameful was that he didn't even know how he lost. Batuk felt more aggrieved the more he thought about it. He said angrily, "If I had known this would happen, I would have surrendered. Why did I even bother fighting?" Laurel was stunned. The other two patriarchs who had approached them at some point also wore strange expressions. Just how strong is this, Brian? Chapter 802. They were not at all surprised that Han Shua could defeat Batuk. After all, Batuk's strength was inferior to Ralph's. If even Ralph was no match for Han Shua, it was only natural that Batuk would be defeated. However, Batuk claimed that he did not even see Han Shua attack during the battle. Wasn't this too outrageous? Under the puzzled gaze of the patriarch, Batuk put on an indignant face and said, "That is indeed the truth. I really did not see him attack." Then how did you lose? Laurel was even more puzzled. It was as though I was trapped in some kind of prison from the beginning of the battle. Shockingly corrosive acid and frost poisons attacked me at the same time. I had no choice but to deploy a defensive boundary. It was only when the divine energy in my body was completely exhausted that I felt that I had escaped from the prison. It was at that moment that Brian appeared and restrained me. Batuk was very depressed. He sounded indescribably aggrieved as he recounted his experience. Laurel was greatly alarmed. He exchanged glances with the patriarchs of the other two major family clans and suddenly became silent. While the crowd was conversing, Aobashi had entered the arena. Han Shua, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly stood up with a smile on his face. "You've arrived." Han Shua looked at Aobashi with a smile. He was uncertain if he should go all out against Aobashi. Han Shua had witnessed Aobashi's strength once and knew that she was an expert in the City of Shadows, second only to Wallace. She was even slightly stronger than Ralph. Han Shua was very confident that he could defeat Aobashi. It was just that the two had a good relationship, and that made him rather hesitant. Aobashi, on the other hand, was much more carefree than Han Shua. She giggled as she walked into the room. She shot a glance at Han Shua with her bright, rippling eyes and giggled sweetly. "I couldn't tell that you have been hiding your true strength." You even managed to defeat Ralph and Batuk without anyone noticing. It seems that I will have to go all out in this match. I hope that Big Sister Aobashi will go easy on me. Han Shuo replied courteously. Against you, I don't dare to be lenient. Otherwise, he might lose in an unsightly manner. Haha, Brian, go all out. Show me your true strength. Don't be a coward like Erebus. Aobashi lightly shouted. She suddenly shot towards Han Shuo like a feather. A monstrous gale suddenly set off in the arena. Sand and pebbles flew around Aobashi. Gusts of wind gathered around Aobashi at high speed and tightly wrapped around her. The wind element from all directions frantically converged towards the center of the gale, forming the tightest wind barrier without leaving a single gap. Once a cultivator of the energy of wind mastered the domain of divinity, he or she could form a barrier with the wind at will. They could also merge their body into the barrier to increase their speed. Han Shuo took advantage of this gap and blasted into the tornado like a fully charged magic crystal cannon. The 100-meter-long tornado formed by Aobashi's divine energy and domain of divinity engulfed Han Shuo almost instantaneously. His figure abruptly disappeared into the tornado. The violent wind, mixed with rocks and trees, violently twisted around and struck towards Han Shuo, who was spinning uncontrollably. Han Shuo's invincible omen body didn't even automatically take on this level of attack. The defensive power of his demonic body had already withstood the attack. Han Shuo wasn't injured in the slightest under the impact of the hundreds of boulders and ancient trees. He allowed his body to spin along with the wind, inching closer and closer to the center of the verdant forest. Aobashi, who was at the center of the tornado, was greatly surprised. Although the rocks and trees themselves did not possess much penetrative power, the force of the tornado's high-speed rotation should have been astonishing. An ordinary person would certainly suffer some damage even if they could handle such an attack. However, Aobashi discovered that Han Shuo was unscathed with the help of the omnipresent wind element. While Aobashi was perplexed, he was slowly approaching Aobashi, who was at the center of the battlefield. A barrier of wind formed from pure divine energy formed from the element of wind in her domain of divinity appeared in front of him, blocking his path forward. With one thought, the 17 flying swords finally shot out from his body. The invincible flying swords contained intense acidity and frost toxins. They had a natural advantage over any barrier. Under the control of Han Shuo's mind, the 17 flying swords converged into a straight line and suddenly struck at a single point. The wind barrier was constantly changing its position as the tornado spun. However, Han Shuo was able to keep a close eye on it. No matter where the wind barrier moved, the 17 swords would stab towards that spot, using the ferocious force of impact and the terrifying acid and cold toxins to corrode that spot. Under Han Shuo's astounding eyesight, the 17 flying swords only needed 3 waves of attacks to break through Aobashi's wind barrier. The moment the wind barrier shattered, Han Shuo suddenly appeared beside Aobashi and grinned. "You can't get away." Aobashi stared blankly for a moment. Before she could react, she discovered that she had been imprisoned by a strange space that had suddenly formed inside her wind barrier. From the moment she fell into that strange space, she discovered that she had lost contact with the surrounding wind elemental energy. She could no longer control the wind barrier that had at least a small crack in it. If a god whose strength was inferior to Han Shuo fell into the hell of Avicii formed by the 17 flying swords, they would have no choice but to compete with Han Shuo in endurance. On top of that, Han Shuo had an enormous advantage by relying on the toxins of acid and frost from the 17 flying swords. On top of that, the cauldron spirit provided him with an endless supply of energy. To compete in endurance with Han Shuo was no different from courting death. Aobashi was no exception. At the sand table at the center of the soaring Cloud Mountain range, the crowd did not see the annoying mist this time. Unfortunately, they found that the scene on the sand table was even worse. The huge tornado that Aobashi had created had occupied almost 1/10 of the arena. The entire arena was shrouded in a thick layer of dust, making it impossible to see what was going on inside. I wonder what's going on? Erebus had a nervous look on his face. He did not know which side he should hope for. On one side were his friends, and on the other side was the woman he loved. This battle has been going on for quite some time. I reckon that Brian won't be able to defeat Aobashi so easily. Rugersi was very vexed and said, "From the scale of the arena, I can tell that this battle is going to be intense, but it's a pity that I can't see anything." Sigh, I still don't know what kind of energy Brian is using. Brian should be the winner of this battle. Aobashi will have to give up her position as the chief of Divine Guards. Although Batuk felt very aggrieved, he had to admit that Han Shuo possessed unfathomable strength. It was taboo for him to face an enemy he couldn't even fathom. Although Aobashi possessed valiant strength, Batuk had seen her in action and had a rough idea of her strength. But when facing Han Shuo, Batuk felt as though he was fighting an invisible person. The feeling of being invisible and untouchable filled him with awe and fear. "Carmelita, who do you hope to win?" Wallace suddenly asked. Carmelita stared blankly for a moment. She thought seriously for a moment before she shook her head and replied, "I don't know. Big Sister Aobashi has been very nice to me, but Brian has been nice to me too. Haha, but Big Sister Aobashi has been in this position for so many years. It's not a bad idea to change it. This way, the City of Shadows will have more vitality." Wallace couldn't help but smile wryly when he heard Carmelita's words. He thought to himself, this silly girl has no idea how much of a storm that youngster's sudden rise will cause. Sigh, it's not easy being a city lord. When the tornado gradually calmed down and crushed rocks and ancient trees fell to the ground, the arena was gradually revealed. This time, Han Shuo did not point the demon's lair edge at Aobashi. But from the calm smile on his face and the dejected look on Aobashi's face, everyone knew the result. He won again. It was as if Wallace's reward was different from what he had expected. He looked at Wallace with a puzzled expression. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. The patriarchs and divine guard chiefs of the three major family clans bunched their brows. According to the rules, the first chief of divine guard would be rewarded with a piece of territory. This territory was usually left over from a declining family clan or a piece of land directly carved out from the House of Saint. But this time, Wallace did not reward Han Shuo with a piece of land. The Han family's shops and forts would have their taxes reduced by half. This had been the case every year. Other than that, Han Shuo was rewarded with some random titles, such as the title of First Chief of Divine Guard and 500,000 black crystal coins. Given the wealth of the Han family's celestial pearl pharmacy, a mere 500,000 black crystal coins wasn't a huge sum. It was definitely not worth the price of a fort or a fief. At present, the City of Shadows does not have any additional fiefs, and the Han family has recently acquired Fort Lossberg. Therefore, I will compensate you with 500,000 black crystal coins, Wallace explained as though he had seen through the crowd's puzzlement. Andre wanted to say something but hesitated for a while. In the end, he just lowered his head and remained silent. "Thank you very much, your lordship." Han Shuo bowed and expressed his gratitude. His face was filled with joy and not the slightest bit of displeasure. The patriarchs of the three major family clans were about to say something, but when they saw that Han Shuo had already expressed his gratitude, they hesitated for a moment and eventually shook their heads. It was as though they did not approve of Wallace's reward for Han Shuo. Erebus, Aobashi, and Ralph received divine weapons from Wallace. As for the other three major family clans, as none of them made it to the top three in any of the categories, they did not receive anything from the competition. The patriarchs of the three major family clans had expected this, and therefore, they did not say anything. With Wallace's arrangement, the rewards were finalized. Although the crowd was puzzled, they did not voice their doubts. Soon enough, the competition between the Divine Guard chiefs came to an end. Following the rules, the crowd performed a series of worshipping rituals. When Wallace signaled for the crowd to disperse, it signaled the end of the competition. The patriarchs of the three major family clans and the Divine Guard chiefs left. Han Shua, too, with a face full of joy, headed for the Five Corps. When Wallace and Andre were the only ones left, Andre gestured for the Divine Guards of the House of Saint to leave. He asked puzzledly, "I don't remember that the reward was supposed to be like this. There was supposed to be a fief. Elder brother, why did you suddenly change your mind?" For so many years, Wallace had never said such things in private. For a moment, Andre was at a loss as to how to respond to Wallace's attitude. "All right, I won't say anything more. I hope you are right." Andre was rather disheartened. He shook his head with a bitter smile, turned around, and left. "In the future, it would be better for you to keep a distance from him. Otherwise, you will be caught in a dilemma when we have to fight in the future," Wallace said in a deep voice as he looked at Andre's departing figure. Andre's body froze for a moment before he replied in a low voice, "I know my place." Upon finishing those words, Andre flew away. When Han Shua returned to the Fifth Corps, the Divine Guards were already waiting for him. As soon as they saw Han Shua, they immediately asked, "My lord, how did it go?" "Just as I promised you, you have taken the first place. I will not fall behind," replied Han Shua in a faint smile. Upon hearing those words, the Divine Guards of the Fifth Corps started cheering excitedly, especially the female Divine Guards. Their eyes were sparkling as they looked at Han Shua. They were so passionate that even Han Shua did not dare to look them in the eye. "I have long said that Master will defeat everyone effortlessly. There is no doubt about it," said Gilbert in a complacent manner. "Senior brother, which territory was given to us?" asked the usually cold and detached Balins. He had been in the Third Corps of Evernight for a long time and was very familiar with the rules of the competition between the chiefs of Divine Guards. "There are some changes to the rules this time. We did not get any territory but 500,000 black crystal coins," replied Han Shua with the same smile on his face. Balins stared blankly for a moment. He put on a dumbfounded face and said, "This?" Han Shua waved his hand and did not explain much. He smilingly said, "Get ready, we are returning to the city." But before Balins could say anything else, Han Shua stopped him with a glance. Balins knew that there must be more to it than meets the eye. Although he was puzzled, he did not ask any questions. He nodded indifferently and instructed his Divine Guards to get ready to return to the City of Shadows at once. Those Divine Guards who were aware of the rules of the duel remained silent, while those who did not know the details were cheering excitedly. Under Balin's command, the Divine Guards prepared themselves and marched towards the City of Shadows in a grandiose manner. Chapter 804. 8 days later, Han Shua and his Fifth Corps Divine Guards returned to the City of Shadows. ******, in a secret chamber of the Han family. Han Shua, Statholm the Old Monster, Ermite Cotton, Balins, Emily, and a few other ladies gathered together to discuss the outcome of the competition between the chiefs of Divine Guards at Soaring Cloud Mountain Range. Wallace has sensed that our family clan is a threat to him. His actions have clearly raised his guard against us. Ermite Cotton and the others were informed of the outcome of the competition in advance. After everyone took their seats, Ermite Cotton immediately expressed his opinion. Statholm nodded and said, "That's right. It seems that Wallace isn't a forgiving person. The House of Lavers has weakened the overall strength of the City of Shadows. The rise of our Han family is just the right time to fill the gap. Not only did he not fully support us, but he even started suppressing us. This is not beneficial for the City of Shadows. Perhaps it is because Brian has displayed too much strength that Wallace has no choice but to guard against him." Emily bunched her brows and said, "If this goes on, I'm afraid that our Han family's development in the City of Shadows will never be smooth sailing again." Han Shua took a glance at everyone's expressions before he put on a faint smile and said, "For us, we have reaped enough benefits in the City of Shadows. Although Wallace has the intention to suppress us, he won't go too far. There is no need to worry too much for the time being." After taking a short pause, Han Shuo continued, "From today onwards, our Han family's development will no longer be focused on the City of Shadows. We will gradually expand the influence of our Celestial Pearl Pharmacy to other dominions. Also, Fort Lossberg is located at the border of the City of Shadows. This territory that belongs to us must be well controlled. Everyone, please put more effort into Fort Lossberg." Yes, as long as our Han family's influence spreads throughout the dominions, even if we fall out with the City of Shadows, we will still be able to find a good home in advance. If this place doesn't want us, there will be other places that want us. Our Han family won't be able to survive in any city. To the members of the Han family, being hindered at the most rapid development of the family made them all unhappy. None of them, including Han Shuo, coveted the City of Shadows. Wallace's actions had chilled their hearts and forced them to make preparations for their future. It's true that we did not obtain the expected benefits from the battle of the Divine Guard chiefs. Wallace has only given me an empty title, Han Shuo said calmly. However, the reputation that he saw as useless is what we need the most right now. Hehe, in just a few days, nearly 100 gods have joined the Han family and the Fifth Bureau. These people will become the pillars of the Han family in the future. This was unimaginable in the past. The Han family had wealth and territory. What they lacked the most right now was manpower. Before Han Shuo led the Fifth Corps and displayed his prowess in the competition, there were only a few people who joined the Fifth Corps and the Han family. But after Han Shuo defeated Ralph and Aobashi and won the title of Chief of Divine Guard Chiefs, and after the Fifth Corps defeated the Second Corps, the number of people joining the Han family and the Han family suddenly increased by dozens of times. These people were much stronger and more talented than those who joined the Han family and the Han family. They were exactly the kind of talents that Han Shuo needed. With that, the divine guards that the Han family and the Fifth Corps lacked were quickly replenished. The Han family was no longer a small family clan that only had a handful of people to protect. It was as though the Han family had been enriched overnight. Yes, we need more manpower. The number of divine guards that have joined the Han family is far from enough. Once the Fifth Corps has 1,000 divine guards, the Han family will have more divine guards. After being tempered in the 8 Desolation and Torment formation, their quality and character will reach a whole new level. As long as the new recruits are as loyal and powerful as the current Fifth Corps divine guards, even if we were to fall out with the House of Saint in the future, we would have the right to speak. Ballins nodded. We need to recruit new recruits, but we must thoroughly investigate their backgrounds. I do not wish for those people to come from large family clans with ulterior motives and come back to bite us at a critical moment. You must keep this in mind. Every person who enters must be checked repeatedly. Han Shuo repeatedly reminded Ballins of this point. Even if they were to recruit fewer people, they must not let anyone in. Don't worry, Senior. I will thoroughly investigate them, Ballins solemnly guaranteed. Gradually, the other Divine Guard Corps and members of large family clans at Soaring Cloud Mountain Range returned to the City of Shadows. Both intentionally and unintentionally, the results of the competition at Soaring Cloud Mountain Range were spread throughout the entire city. A genius pharmacist who defeated Aobashi and Ralph and trained his subordinates to become the most powerful force with the greatest teamwork. All kinds of news about Han Shuo started to spread through different channels. The gods residing in various towns and fortresses of the City of Shadows were discussing this matter in high spirits. Those who were confident in themselves and wanted to achieve great things started to feel tempted. They wondered if they should change their minds. Carter, let's not join the House of Kisa. Let's join the Han family. The Han family is like the sun at high noon. They also have medicines that can increase their strength. This is indeed a wise choice. Let's go to the Fifth Corps. It is said that the Fifth Corps is in dire need of divine guards. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Aren't you going? Forget it. I don't have mid-god strength. They won't be interested in me. Similar conversations were repeated in every corner of the City of Shadows. Ambitious experts from various regions gathered in the City of Shadows and headed straight for the Fifth Corps and the Han family. They were willing to endure all sorts of trials and tribulations just to get in. For a moment, The entire city of shadows was bustling with noise and excitement. Many people traveled thousands of miles to the city of shadows. Some of these people even came from other cities and dominions. When they heard that the Han family was recruiting divine guards, they came to the city with the intention of giving it a try. The Han family and the Fifth Corps became extremely busy. Long lines of people lined up at the two places that were in dire need of manpower. Inspectors Bollins of the Fifth Corps and Statholm and Ermike of the Han family were busy from day to night, examining the divine guards who came to the city with all sorts of harsh conditions. The patriarchs of the three major family clans were secretly observing the activity in the city. They observed the Han family's grand recruitment with cold eyes and tacitly maintained their silence. Erebus and Aobashi of the House of Saint were reassigned to the border by Wallace after the competition. They did not come to congratulate Han Shuo. Carmelita and Andre, for some reason, did not come to visit Han Shuo during this period of time. All the family clans that maintained friendly relations with the Han family did not dare to get too close to the Han family. It was as though they were afraid that they would become a taboo. As the situation in the City of Shadows was rather delicate, Han Shuo did not immediately leave for the fringe. Instead, he stayed at the Han family to oversee the situation. At such a sensitive time, if Han Shuo were to leave the City of Shadows with Rose, the Han family would not be able to hold on without a high god. Therefore, Han Shuo had no choice but to stay for the time being. Before he could ensure the safety of the Han family, Han Shuo would not take the risk of leaving. Time flew by and a year had passed in the blink of an eye. During that year, the House of Han and the Fifth Corps had recruited more than 500 divine guards. And this was because the House of Han's recruitment requirements were too strict. They only recruited those with clean backgrounds and extraordinary talents. All those experts who were born with some problems or were not tenacious enough to take advantage of the situation were excluded. Once the newly recruited divine guards were determined to be absolutely loyal to Han Shuo, they would be sent to the 8 Desolation and Torment formation to temper themselves. If Han Shuo and Jia were to hold a grand wedding in the City of Shadows, they would not be able to accept it. Don't worry, I won't marry her. Han Shuo put on a faint smile and wrote a letter in front of the ladies. He rejected Casper's kind intentions and asked Bollins to personally deliver it to the Kinson residence. When writing the letter, Han Shuo did not expect that it would eventually become the cause of a dispute between the major family clans in the City of Shadows. Chapter 805. Asterisk 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 at the Kinson residence in the City of Shadows. As soon as Bollins left, Casper tore the letter in his hand into shreds. He sneered and said, "I didn't expect that he would refuse." Beth and Camilla, who were standing beside him, were also astonished. They did not expect that Han Shuo would make such a decision. From their point of view, once the Han family and the Kinson family were united by marriage, even the House of Saint would have to think twice before dealing with the Han family. Once the two families united, it would be a win-win situation for both the Han family and the Kinson family, especially when Jia was a well-known beauty in the City of Shadows. Casper was very surprised that such a beauty that everyone wanted was offered to him by their family. Yet, someone actually refused to marry her. What is this man thinking? Beth was rather annoyed. She said hatefully, "Does he think that our Kinson family is not worthy of him? It's true that the Han family has been on the rise for the past few years. But how long has it been since they came to the City of Shadows? Do they really think that they have the ability to go toe-to-toe with the House of Saint?" Camilla, inform the patriarchs of the other two family clans that the youngster doesn't know what's good for him. I have no choice but to let them try. Casper instructed his sister Camilla with a gloomy face. Camilla nodded and quietly left. Soon enough, the patriarchs of the other two family clans received the news. The three patriarchs had been discussing in private and agreed that they could make use of the conflict between the Han family and the House of Saint. They planned to use Han Shuo's power to probe the House of Saint's reaction. Casper's plan was only the first step. Little did they expect that it would fail. Kinloch of the House of Kisa and Laurel of the House of Buller replied that they would not act rashly for the time being. They would wait and see what Wallace would do with the Fifth Corps. After Avery's death, the original members of the Fifth Corps were scattered. All the responsibilities were shared by the other corps. By now, the Fifth Corps had recruited 300 Divine Guards and formed 3 new companies of 100 men. Together with the victorious company, the Fifth Corps was fully capable of regaining control of the territory they were originally in charge of. Logically speaking, Wallace should have released his authority by now. However, there had been no news for a long time. They were secretly watching the House of Saint and the Han family, trying to figure out if there would be any conflict between the two. What? It was still the Kinson family. Gia flew into a rage when she heard the news from her mother, Beth. Who allowed you to act on your own? Gia did not know about the correspondence between Casper and Han Shua beforehand. When she suddenly learned of this fact, she felt as if she had been deceived, especially when the result was so cruel and unacceptable. Gia's rage was unusually fierce. More than half of the City of Shadows knows that you like that youngster. Your father is doing this for your own good. Beth sighed softly and said, I just didn't expect that brat to be so unappreciative. He must be blind to have rejected my precious daughter's marriage for the sake of a few women he brought from a low-class plane. What can he accomplish with that kind of eyesight? Enough. I don't need you to make decisions for me. Gia was furious. She slammed the door and left. Han family, Emily, Phoebe, and the other ladies were no longer resentful. When they saw with their own eyes that Han Shua had written a letter and tactfully rejected Casper's proposal, they felt as though they had been doused with cold water on a hot summer day. The new batch of Divine Guards who walked out of the 8 Desolation and Torment formation were examined by Ballins in high spirits. Ballins believed that these Divine Guards were fully capable of taking on all kinds of missions in the City of Shadows. However, it was a pity that the House of Saint had yet to give them a definite answer. Many of the Divine Guards were left unoccupied in the city. Ballins went to look for Han Shua and reported the situation to Han Shua. He said, all the squads of Divine Guards are currently in the Fifth Corps. They are doing nothing but training. As the Fifth Corps does not have any missions and some of the city districts they were originally in charge of have been taken over by the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps, there is no way for us to gain practical experience. Without any missions or authority, we don't even have the chance to leave the city for training. We can't go on like this. Those Divine Guards who joined the Fifth Corps had undergone a round of strict training by Ballins. They had truly regarded themselves as members of the Han family and placed the interests of the Han family above all else. But it was a pity that the Fifth Corps had nothing to do during this period of time. They had been training in a fixed area in the city all day and had grown tired of it. I'll go and ask Andre about it. He hasn't been here for a while. It seems that Wallace must have put a lot of pressure on him. Han Shua thought for a moment and decided to pay a visit to the Saint residence. This matter was unavoidable. Even if Wallace was suspicious of him, some matters had to be resolved as soon as possible. Your lordship, even if we can't gain any authority, we can at least leave the City of Shadows. Those squads of Divine Guards in Fort Lossberg can be sharpened through various methods. Naturally, Ballins knew that the relationship between the Han family and the House of Saint was not harmonious. I understand, replied Han Shua as he nodded. He then departed for the Saint residence. Even though he had not been to the Saint residence for a year, the Divine Guards recognized Han Shua. But when they heard that Han Shua was looking for Andre, they seemed rather troubled. One of them said, my apologies, but Lord Andre has been cultivating ever since he returned from Soaring Cloud Mountain Range. No one is allowed to disturb him. Even the city lord has sought him out several times, but he did not come out. It seems that he must have made an important breakthrough in his cultivation. Han Shua couldn't help but stare blankly at those words. From the conversation between the Divine Guards, Han Shua could tell that Andre was dissatisfied with Wallace's actions. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used such a method to refuse Wallace's summons. Han Shua understood that since Wallace was bent on suppressing the Han family, it would be difficult for Andre to get caught in the middle. After all, Han Shuo was a member of the House of Saint and Andre couldn't possibly go against Wallace's wishes. I see. Since Lord Andre is making the best use of his time in cultivation, Carmelita should be doing the same, right? Han Shuo put on a faint smile and asked. That's right. Just like Lord Andre, Miss Carmelita was forced to enter the gymnasium by the city lord right after she returned from soaring Cloud Mountain Range. She hasn't left the gymnasium ever since, replied the divine guard hastily. Oh, I see. Forget it then. Han Shuo did not have the intention to talk to Wallace in detail. He turned around and left the Saint residence without even stepping into it. On the way back, Han Shuo carefully thought about it. He suddenly realized that it might be a good idea to leave the City of Shadows for a while. Even if Wallace really wanted to deal with Han Shuo, once Han Shuo left the City of Shadows, Wallace wouldn't be able to do anything to the Han family. To Wallace, Han Shuo was the one he was most apprehensive about. If he really wanted to deal with the Han family, he would first have to subdue Han Shuo. The other members of the Han family shouldn't be a threat to Wallace at all. In other words, as long as Han Shuo left, the members of the Han family would be safe from Wallace. After returning to the Han family, Han Shuo gathered Balins, Sanguiner, Gilbert, Statholm, Ermike, and the others and instructed, shift the focus of the family's development to Lossberg. Balins, you don't have to worry about the rules. Use all kinds of excuses to move the 5th Corps Divine Guards to Lossberg. Leave only the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy in the City of Shadows. All important members of the family will move to Lossberg one after another. Brian, are you leaving the City of Shadows? Asked Statholm. Han Shuo nodded and smilingly replied, That's what I'm thinking, but I haven't made up my mind yet. For the time being, you all will stay in Fort Lossberg. The focus of the family can be placed in other dominions or cities. Don't get into any conflicts with other family clans. Following that, Han Shuo wrote a few personal letters, one to Wallace, one to Erebus, and one to Aobashi. He instructed his divine guards to deliver the letters, stating that he was going on a trip. In the letter to Wallace, Han Shuo's wording was tactful. He hinted that he had no intention of seizing power in the City of Shadows. Han Shuo knew that Wallace wouldn't necessarily believe him. However, as long as he wasn't in the City of Shadows, even if Wallace wanted to suppress the Han family, Han Shuo believed that he wouldn't go too far. In the 2 letters to Erebus and Aobashi, Han Shuo hoped that the 2 could help him look after the Han family. Given the relationship between Han Shuo and the 2, there was no doubt that they would help. With Andre and Carmelita around, as long as it wasn't the House of Saint, Han Shuo wouldn't have to worry about other family clans doing anything to the Han family. No matter where you go, be careful. I will ensure the safety of the Han family when you are not in the City of Shadows. 3 days later, Han Shuo received Wallace's reply. Han Shuo couldn't help but laugh. From the wording of the letter, Han Shuo knew that his guess was correct. Wallace was most worried about him. If Han Shuo wasn't around, Wallace wouldn't lay a finger on the Han family. Han Shuo was truly relieved. He made some arrangements in the City of Shadows before leaving with Rose. They traveled all the way to Fort Lossberg. After arriving at Fort Lossberg, Han Shuo first recreated the 8 Desolation and Torment formation. Then, he used a large amount of materials and Cauldron Spirit's energy to deploy a total of 4 demonic formations of various sizes in Han Shuo's residence. Shura Formation of Illusionary God, Lightning Formation, Omen Spirit Gathering Formation, and Non-Poisonous Mysticaline Formation. The 4 formations were placed at the 4 corners of the residence, with the 8 Desolation and Torment formation at the center. With the help of the Cauldron of Myriad Demon, it took Han Shuo half a year to complete the 4 newly formed demonic matrices. After Han Shuo had tested the power of the demonic matrices one by one and explained in detail how to use them to Candide, Stratholm, and the others, he finally felt at ease. With the 4 demonic formations in place, even if the Han family were to be attacked, they would be able to hold their ground for a long time. Enemies who dared to barge into the formations would have to pay a grave price. Given Han Shuo's current realm and Cauldron Spirit's assistance, even if there were high gods among the intruders, they would die if they weren't careful. After everything was properly arranged, Han Shua saw that Phoebe and the others were arriving at Fort Lossberg from the City of Shadows. Wallace did not seem to have any intention of stopping them. Han Shua left with Rose. Their destination was the Fringe. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.